Story 1: Deadly stranger stalks passerby in alley. I had always found Lyon's narrow streets charming by day, with their weathered stone and the faint, lingering smells of fresh bread and brewing coffee. It was October 12th, 2023. The chill had settled firmly in the air, the kind that seeps through layers of clothing and settles under your skin. I had left a late meeting downtown, the kind that runs longer than you'd want, and decided to cut through a maze of alleys instead of taking the main streets. I was tired, my mind cluttered with thoughts about work and the mounting pressure of deadlines, so I wasn't paying close attention to my surroundings. I should have been. I wandered into one of those narrow alleys, the kind where the buildings lean in close, as if trying to keep secrets from the world. The alley was dimly lit by a single flickering street lamp at the far end, a weak, yellow-orange glow that barely pushed back the darkness. The walls were damp and scarred with graffiti, the air thick with the smell of refuse and something metallic I couldn't place. The only sound was the soft slap of my shoes against the rough pavement. As I walked, I thought I heard something behind me, at first just a vague noise like a breeze stirring debris, but then footsteps. Footsteps that were quickening, nearly matching my own pace. I stopped and stood still, heart suddenly pounding, ears straining. The footsteps paused as well. I looked back down the alley, but all I saw was shadow. I told myself it was probably another pedestrian or someone leaving a nearby bar. But the street was nearly deserted at this hour. Still, I tried to shake off the feeling. I moved forward again, only to hear the steps start up once more, unmistakably quickening, now accelerating to nearly match my stride. The sound was deliberate, measured, too measured. I dared to glance back, and that's when I caught sight of him. A man, tall and shadowed, emerging from the darker end of the alley. His features were obscured by the poor light, but his posture was rigid, unnervingly still except for the steady pacing of his steps. We were the only two in the alley, and he was matching me step for step, almost mirroring my movements. Fear bloomed in my chest with each heartbeat. I tried to tell myself that maybe he was just walking in the same direction, but the alley was narrow and there was nowhere else for him to go except behind me. I quickened my pace, and so did he. I slowed, and he did the same. I stopped again, so did he. My mind raced. Should I call out? Run? Turn back? I fumbled for my phone, fingers trembling as I unlocked it and glanced at the screen. No signal. Of course. The alley's walls felt like a prison, and the faint glow of my screen barely pierced the gloom. I swallowed the lump in my throat and forced myself to keep moving forward, hoping to reach the street at the end of the alley where the lights were brighter, and people were more likely to be around. But the alley didn't seem to end. The walls closed in tighter, and the path curved slightly. I could swear the man was still there, no more than a few steps behind, as silent as a shadow but just as relentless. Every time I glanced back, his face was blank, expressionless, hiding whatever thoughts or intentions he carried. I tried to stay calm, breathing shallow but steady. My eyes darted to the sides, searching for any possible exit or even a small doorway to slip into. Nothing. Just the unbroken stone walls and the same dim light ahead. Then I saw a narrow passage to my left, barely wide enough for a person. Relief surged through me. Maybe I could slip through, lose him in the maze of alleys. I broke into a jog, turning sharply. The man followed without hesitation, matching the sudden change in my direction with a speed that was almost unnatural for someone so composed. I pressed myself against the wall, heart hammering in my ears, listening as his footsteps echoed just beyond the corner. I thought about calling for help, but the street was dead silent aside from those steps. No shouting, no other voices, just me and him. Swallowing my fear, I peeked around the corner. The passage opened into another alley, no wider, no better lit. I hesitated, trying to decide whether to risk moving or staying still. Then I heard a soft, almost casual sound, a key sliding into a lock, a door creaking open. I dashed toward it, hoping it was an inhabited building, a place to hide, somewhere safe. I reached the door and pushed it open, slipping inside. It was a small shop, closed but not empty. The air smelled faintly of leather and old paper. I pressed my back against the door, holding it shut, and listened. Outside, the footsteps stopped. I held my breath. Minutes passed. When I dared to look through the window, the alley was empty. The man was gone. But I didn't feel relief. Not yet. Because I knew the city wasn't done with me, not that night, not this close. I stayed in the shop until my phone finally got a signal again, and I called a friend to come get me. As I waited in the dim light, the memory of those footsteps, so close, so deliberate, echoed in my mind, reminding me that some dangers don't show their faces right away. And some fears don't end with the disappearance of a shadow. The footsteps behind me grew louder, sharper, quicker, like a steady tapping against the cobblestones, a rhythm that matched but never quite synced with my own gait. I told myself I was imagining it. The mind plays tricks, especially when you're tired and alone in a place like this. But then, I started walking again, slower this time, glancing back over my shoulder. The alley stretched out behind me, dark and narrow, the flickering street lamp's light barely reaching halfway down. And there, a shape, a man, tall, wearing a long dark coat, his face slack and unreadable, stood a few meters behind me. I froze. He didn't say anything. He didn't even quicken his pace. He just started following me. Panic gnawed at my stomach. My first thought was to run, but the alley was a dead end at one side, and I had been heading toward that very end. Turning back meant going past him. I tried to think clearly. I needed options. I quickened my pace, the heel of my shoe striking the cobblestones more sharply now, trying to put distance between us. The man mirrored my every move, quickening his step when I did, pausing when I paused, always the same distance behind me. It was deliberate, methodical. He wasn't fumbling or nervous. He was stalking me. My breath came in short bursts, the cold air cutting into my lungs as adrenaline surged. I scanned the alley walls. On my left, a narrow doorway, half hidden in shadows, possibly the entrance to a storage room or a back entrance to a cafe. To the right, a wooden gate, old and slightly ajar. Beyond that, I remembered, was a small courtyard that led to a busier street. It was a long shot, but it was a way out. I veered toward the gate, moving as fast as I dared without running. The man mirrored this change instantly, closing the gap between us by a small but undeniable margin. I could hear the soft rustle of his coat brushing against the wall, his footsteps never faltering. My fingers brushed the rough wood of the gate. It was loose, and with a quick push, it swung open just wide enough for me to slip through. Heart pounding so hard it was a wonder my chest didn't burst, I slipped inside the courtyard, turning sharply to close the gate behind me. I froze again. The man was there, just outside, his face now partially illuminated by the dull glow of a nearby lamp. His eyes were cold, unreadable, and locked onto me with an unnerving intensity. No words, no expression. Just a quiet, steady menace. I pressed my back against the gate, hearing the faint scraping sound as he tried to force it open. It didn't budge. But I was trapped. The courtyard was small, surrounded by high walls and locked doors. The only exit was a metal stairwell that led up to a busy street above. I scanned the yard desperately. The stairwell was there but looked far away, and I was on the ground floor, hemmed in on every side. I started moving quickly toward the stairwell, keeping my eyes on him the entire time. He didn't follow me into the courtyard. Instead, he stood just outside, watching, waiting. I felt a wave of dread wash over me. This wasn't random. He wasn't just following me, he was hunting me. I grasped the cold metal railing and began to climb. My breath was ragged, each step loud in the quiet courtyard. Halfway up, I looked back. The man was still there, standing below, unmoving. He didn't try to follow. When I reached the top, I pushed open the door and spilled onto the street. The noise of passing cars and distant chatter hit me like a wall. I didn't stop to catch my breath. I blended into the crowd, forcing myself to look like a normal pedestrian, someone who belonged here. But inside, I was shattered. Where had he come from? Why was he following me? And most terrifying of all, what would happen if I ever looked back? That night, in the safety of my apartment, the image of that silent man lingered in my mind, a shadow that refused to fade. Sleep eluded me. Every creak of the old building sounded like footsteps on the stairs. I kept the curtains drawn tight, the city lights outside reduced to muted glows behind thick fabric. My phone lay on the table, screen dark and lifeless. I resisted the urge to call anyone, to break the silence that had wrapped around me since the encounter. Trust was a fragile thing now, a luxury I couldn't afford. Morning brought no relief. The sun cast sharp angles through the window, but instead of comfort, the light exposed every crack in my resolve. I moved mechanically, brewing coffee, getting dressed as if going through the motions would prevent the thoughts from spiraling. But they came anyway, aggressive and insistent. I thought about the man's eyes, cold and unreadable. Not angry, not desperate, just watchful. It was as if he knew something I didn't, a secret buried deep beneath the surface of my life. And the worst part? I had no idea what that secret was. Maybe I never did. Determined not to let fear dictate my actions, I grabbed my coat and stepped outside. The city buzzed with its usual rhythm, oblivious to the storm inside me. I kept my head down, my steps deliberate. Somewhere in the back of my mind, a single question echoed louder than the rest. How long could I keep running before I had to face whatever was waiting in the shadows? I pressed my back against the rough brick wall, every muscle tensed as I tried to steady my breathing. I forced myself to glance over my shoulder. There he was, the man from before. Silent, expressionless, as if he had all the time in the world to follow me like a shadow. His dark overcoat swallowed him whole, and his pale face was partially obscured beneath the brim of a hat pulled low. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second. There was no recognition there, no kindness, just a cold, unyielding presence that rooted me in place. I swallowed hard, trying to summon an excuse to move, to make a break for it, but my legs refused to cooperate. I was trapped between the walls, with nowhere to turn. Ahead, the alley opened into a small square, but the flickering light made it difficult to see what waited there. To my right, the alley bent sharply, disappearing into shadow. Behind me, the street was sealed off by a rusty metal gate, locked shut since I'd entered this suffocating passage. Panic bubbled up, hot and sticky in my chest. The logical part of my mind screamed at me to stay calm, but my heart pounded so loudly I was sure the man must hear it too. I tried to think. Why was he following me? Did he want to rob me? Kidnap me? The possibilities twisted and churned inside my head, each more terrifying than the last. I couldn't risk looking back again, so I shifted my weight, edging forward slowly. I kept my steps light, trying to blend into the shadows. The man mirrored me instantly, his pace unchanging. He never lost sight of me, never blinked. It was like a game, but the stakes felt lethal. As I neared the bend in the alley, I spotted a narrow doorway set into the wall. The faded paint was chipped, and the door seemed old and unused, but it was something, a possible refuge. With no other options, I made a split-second decision and slipped toward it, pressing my hand against the cold wood. The door was locked, but barely, an old latch that gave way with a soft creak when I tugged it. I slipped inside and pulled the door shut behind me, pressing my back to the wood as the footsteps slowed outside. I dared a peek through a cracked panel and saw the man pause, standing just beyond the doorway, as if sensing something hidden. The street lamp's light cast his shadow long and thin against the wall. He didn't knock. He didn't call out. He just waited. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The distant hum of the city beyond the alley was muted here, replaced by the damp, musty smell of the abandoned space, dust motes floating in the weak light from a grimy window high above. My chest tightened as I tried to control the trembling in my hands. Suddenly, a soft scraping noise at the door made me freeze. The man was trying the handle. "No," I whispered, my voice barely a breath. The latch groaned under his pressure, but held. He tried again, more forceful this time, and I felt the door quiver beneath his grip. My mind raced. I needed a way out, but the room was bare. A broken chair lay in the corner, a rusted pipe leaned against the far wall. Nothing I could use. I crouched low, heart hammering, listening for any other exits. There was a small window, but too high to reach. I looked back at the door just as the man pushed harder. The lock splintered, and the door began to give way. I scrambled backward, desperate. There was no time. Suddenly, a shout rang out from the alley. "Hey! What's going on here?" The man froze, his hand still on the door, then turned abruptly and vanished into the shadows. My breath caught. I stayed silent, waiting until footsteps receded. The door creaked open slowly, and a figure stepped inside, a young woman, her phone flashlight cutting through the gloom. "Are you okay?" she asked, concern etched on her face. I nodded, voice shaky. He was following me. I don't know why. She frowned but smiled kindly. "Let's get you out of here. It's not safe." Together, we stepped into the night, the city suddenly feeling vast and unknowable in all its shadowed corners. But for the first time since I'd entered that alley, I felt a sliver of relief. He was gone, for now. But the memory of his silent pursuit would linger, a chill beneath my skin that no light could reach. The streetlights flickered overhead as we moved briskly, her hand steadying my arm. The cool air did little to calm the pounding of my heart, each step echoing my unease. "Do you think he'll come back?" I whispered, glancing over my shoulder into the darkness that seemed to close in behind us. She shook her head, eyes sharp. "Not if we keep moving. But we need a plan. Someone who can help. Do you have anywhere safe to go?" I hesitated. Everywhere felt unsafe lately. "No, not really." She squeezed my hand reassuringly. "Then you'll come with me. My place isn't far, and I have friends, people who know how to handle this kind of thing." A mix of gratitude and fear welled up inside me. Trust didn't come easily after tonight, but I had little choice. As we turned a corner, the distant hum of the city blended with the steady rhythm of our footsteps, a fragile promise that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't alone after all. The night air felt colder, but her presence was a small warmth against the uncertainty ahead. The footsteps behind me didn't stop. The narrow alley seemed to close in on me. Lion's charm, its quaintness, felt like a cruel joke now. The flickering street lamp at the far end barely illuminated the slick stones beneath my feet. The shadows pulled like ink in the recesses between the buildings. I glanced over my shoulder, trying to catch a glimpse of the person matching my steps. It was impossible to see clearly, not just the dim light but the way the man somehow moved in sync with me, as if he were a dark mirror. I stopped abruptly, frozen by the certainty that the footsteps behind me mimicked my pause without hesitation. My breath caught, a sharp intake that made my chest ache. I looked up, eyes scanning the walls, the grimy windows, the overflowing trash bins. There was no escape here. The alley stretched behind me, blocked at the far end by a cluster of parked bicycles and a locked gate, rusted and unyielding. Ahead, only the blinding glow of the main street beckoned, but the alley was too narrow for me to feel safe running without knowing what was behind. I swallowed hard, trying to calm the rising panic. The man was close now, his footsteps a steady echo of mine, neither advancing nor retreating. I realized, with a cold stab of fear, that he wasn't just following me, he was matching me. Every move I made, he made too, silent and deliberate, like a shadow that had detached itself from the light. I tried to reason with myself. What if he was just a late-night wanderer, like me, lost or heading somewhere? But something about the way he moved didn't feel right. There was no hesitation, no glance around, no pause other than when I paused. It was calculated, predatory almost. My mind raced, trying to formulate a plan, but the alley offered no easy solutions. Turning back meant facing him head-on, running meant risking a stumble on the uneven pavement. My phone was in my jacket pocket. I fumbled for it, hands trembling. The screen lit up in my palm, casting shadows on the peeling walls. I opened the emergency dial, thumb hovering over the call button. But something stopped me. If I made a sound, if I called for help, would he react? Would he disappear into the night or confront me? I didn't know, and the uncertainty gnawed at me like acid. The footsteps quickened suddenly. Not in a burst of speed, but a subtle increase in pace, a gentle pressure against mine, as if closing the invisible gap I hadn't fully realized was there. I forced myself to keep moving forward, each step a battle against the urge to bolt. My eyes darted to the left, where an old wooden door stood slightly ajar. It looked like it led into a storage room or perhaps a forgotten cellar. The darkness inside was impenetrable. I took a chance and slipped through, pushing the door slowly to avoid creaking. The air inside was cold and thick with dust, the faint smell of mold and stale earth. I pressed my back against the door, heart hammering, and peered out through the narrow crack. The alley was empty. The footsteps had stopped. Relief surged through me, swift and merciless. I waited, counting the seconds. Then the footsteps began again, soft this time, deliberate. They circled the entrance, slow and patient. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing myself to be invisible, to disappear into the darkness. The door shuddered slightly under a firm hand. Panic flared. I slid the door open a crack, peeking out. The man was there, just outside, his face calm, unreadable. His eyes locked with mine for a brief second, deep, unblinking, like a predator assessing its prey. There was no malice in his gaze, no rage, only a cold, methodical interest that sent a chill down my spine. I shut the door quickly, pressing the lock into place. My breath was ragged, chest heaving. I had no idea what he wanted, no idea why he was stalking me through this godforsaken alley. But I knew one thing, I wasn't safe until I got out of here, and I was going to have to be smarter than him to do it. Minutes passed, or maybe just seconds, I couldn't tell. The footsteps stopped entirely. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the faint hum of the city beyond the alley's mouth. I debated my options. Staying hidden meant waiting, hoping he lost interest. But what if he didn't? What if he was waiting for me to make a mistake? I peered out again, squinting into the gloom. The street beyond was empty. The locked gate at the end of the alley glinted faintly in the street lamp's glow. My phone buzzed softly in my pocket, a message from a friend checking in. The normalcy of it made the surreal terror in the alley feel even more absurd and yet more urgent. I had to move. I took a deep breath and eased the door open, stepping out into the muted light. The man was gone. I scanned the alley quickly, relief washing over me. I bolted toward the main street, not looking back until I was surrounded by the brightness and noise of Lyon's bustling nightlife. Only then did I slow, hands shaking. I was safe for now. But in the pit of my stomach, I knew the memory of those silent footsteps would haunt me for a long time. The city's hum felt both comforting and alien, a reminder that safety was always temporary. I needed answers fast. By daylight, Lyon's winding alleys held a quaint allure, their aged stones whispering tales beneath the scent of warm bread and rich coffee. I quickened my pace, trying to ignore the prickling sensation of eyes on my back. The alley was claustrophobic, the walls on either side pressed in, stained with years of crime and streaked with rust from old pipes. The faint light from the flickering street lamp barely reached me, casting long, jittery shadows. I swallowed hard, my breath visible in the cold night air. I glanced over my shoulder. At first, I saw nothing but darkness, the alley stretching back empty and silent. Then, just as my eyes adjusted, I saw him, a man. He was far enough behind that his features were vague, but I could see the shape of his head and shoulders, the way he moved with unnerving precision. He wasn't just walking quickly, he was matching my every step, mirroring my rhythm exactly. I stopped, holding my breath, and so did he, not 50 feet away, frozen like a statue. My mind raced. Was he a mugger? A lunatic? I had no idea. But the silence between us was thick with menace. I swallowed again, forcing my legs to move before panic could root me to the spot. I turned sharply left, trying to lose him amongst a maze of alleys. But it was no use. When I looked back, he was still there, unnervingly silent, still matching my pace, not rushing, not slowing, just following. I tried to think. The main street was a few blocks ahead, but the way I'd come was blocked by a delivery truck parked too close to the wall to pass behind. The street lamp nearby flickered and died, plunging the narrow path into near darkness. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but the alley was a dead end in the other direction, hemmed in by a locked gate and a dumpster. I was trapped. I moved sideways, hoping to find an alternate route, the sound of my footsteps echoing off the brick walls. The man mirrored my every movement with unnerving precision. My mind scrambled for options. Should I call for help? But my phone was tucked deep inside my coat pocket, buried beneath layers. I tried to slow down, let him approach, and see what he wanted. I forced myself to stop completely, my heart pounding so loud I was sure he could hear it. He stopped as well, just a few feet behind me, invisible in the shadows. The silence between us thickened, oppressive and heavy, until I could almost feel it pressing on my chest. Then, without warning, he stepped forward, the faint scrape of his shoes on the cobblestones louder than before. I spun around, hands up, trying to keep a safe distance, but the alley was so narrow that physical space meant nothing. The man was close now, close enough that I could see him clearly in the weak light from a nearby window. He was unremarkable in every way, no weapons visible, just a plain jacket and dark jeans. His eyes, however, were cold and unreadable. "Why are you following me?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. It came out hoarse, a whisper swallowed by the night. He didn't answer. Instead, he took a step closer, his expression unreadable, almost blank. I took a cautious step back, my mind screaming at me to run, but I had nowhere to go. The gate behind was locked tight, the only other exit was blocked by heavy trash bins. "Look, I don't want any trouble," I added, trying to sound calm, hoping my words would diffuse whatever this was. "If you're lost, I can help you find your way." His eyes flicked to mine too quickly, too deliberately, and then his gaze dropped to the ground for a moment before snapping back up. He raised a finger and pointed, not at me, but down the alley to my right. I followed his gesture with my eyes and saw, just barely, the faint outline of a narrow passageway I had missed in my earlier scan. "Go," he said, his voice low and measured, almost monotonous. I hesitated. The passage looked grim, narrower still, choked with rubbish and broken glass, but it was my only chance. The man's gaze held a strange intensity, like a challenge or a warning. Without another word, I turned and ran, the scrape of my shoes against the uneven pavement deafening in my ears. Behind me, I heard him move as well, but this time he wasn't chasing. He remained at the alley's mouth, watching me disappear into the shadowed passage. The narrow path was barely wide enough for one person. I stumbled over garbage and broken bottles, my heart racing, lungs burning from the sudden exertion. Every instinct screamed to keep moving, to get away. I dared not look back. At the end of the passage, an iron gate barred the way, a rusted, padlocked gate that I somehow had to get through. I rattled the lock, desperate, my fingers fumbling against the cold metal. After what felt like an eternity, the lock gave way with a sharp snap, and I pushed the gate open. I spilled out onto a quiet residential street, the glow of streetlights washing over faded shutters and closed shops. I didn't stop running until I reached the main boulevard, where crowds of late-night revelers spilled out of cafes and bars, the noise and light a welcome balm against the dark alley's suffocating silence. I finally dared to look back. The alley was empty. No sign of a man. It was as if he had vanished into the shadows from which he had come. My hands trembled as I fumbled for my phone, calling a taxi to take me home. The city around me was alive and bustling, indifferent to the fear that still clung to my skin. That night, safe behind locked doors and drawn curtains, I kept replaying the encounter in my mind. Who was that man? Why had he followed me so deliberately, so silently? Had he intended to harm me, or was there something else behind his quiet stalking? I didn't know. And somehow, not knowing felt worse than any answer. Story 2, terrifying found camera with hidden memory card containing surveillance images. The day I found the camera was the day the city felt colder, even though Melbourne was still stubbornly holding on to the last breath of its waning winter. I was coming home late from work, the sky already faded to a dull indigo, the street lamps flickering on, casting long shadows across the pavement. The usual city noise was there, cars rolling by, distant chatter, the faint hum of a tram, but underneath it all was a subtle, eerie quiet that didn't belong. The kind of silence that presses up against the back of your neck, daring you to turn around. I noticed the camera sitting on the ground just as I reached for my keys. It wasn't like me to stare at random objects, but something about its position, half hidden under the edge of a garbage bin, peeking out as if it had been dropped deliberately, set off a warning bell in my head. I bent down and picked it up, feeling the cold plastic and recognizing the model instantly. I'd seen these before, the sort tourists snap photos with, or people who wanted to document their days in an analog way, before smartphones took over. But it wasn't mine. I didn't know whose it was. I hesitated, turning it over in my hands. There was no obvious damage, just some dust and smudges. No strap, no identifying marks. The lens cap was on, but the shutter button was unlocked. I pressed it once, and a tiny red light blinked on the top. It had a memory card inside. I didn't want to bring it inside, but the urge to know was overpowering. Standing there outside in the night, I felt the weight of the camera heavier than it should have been. I unlocked my door with trembling fingers and slipped inside, locking the door behind me. I set the camera on the kitchen counter and opened my laptop. My apartment was the kind I'd chosen carefully when I moved to Melbourne 2 years ago, a modest one-bedroom unit in a nondescript building in Carlton, close to the university and the cafes I liked. The windows faced east, looking out onto a narrow laneway between two brick buildings. Usually, the view was nothing more than the backyards of other apartments, a rusted fire escape, and a stray cat or two. I liked it because it was quiet, private. I plugged the camera's memory card into my laptop, ignoring the knot tightening in my stomach. What I saw next made every hair on my body stand on end. The first images were innocuous shots of the laneway, a fence, the fire escape. But then, I saw photos of my apartment window. Not from inside, but from outside, framed by the bricks and the rusted metal of the fire escape. There I was, captured without my knowledge. Sitting at my desk, working on my laptop. Standing at the window, looking out. In some, I was completely unaware of the camera's gaze. In others, I had just turned my head, as if sensing something but never quite finding it. The dates on the image files spanned 3 weeks almost every day, sometimes multiple times a day. Early morning shots of me making coffee. Afternoon photos when I had visitors, the expressions on my face clear and intimate, as if the photographer had been standing just beyond the window. Nighttime images too, when I was curled up on the couch reading, the light from the lamp casting shadows that highlighted the tiredness in my eyes. My heart hammered so hard I thought it would burst. Who had been watching me? How long had this been going on? And most unsettling of all, why had they left the camera here? I scrolled through the images compulsively, each photo a silent confirmation of my vulnerability. Whoever this person was, they had been meticulous. The angles were carefully chosen to avoid detection but close enough to capture details. There was no zooming in from a distance. The shots looked like they had been taken from the narrow fire escape or a hidden vantage point just a few meters from my window. I replayed the timeline in my mind. I'd never felt watched before, but now, evidence was staring back at me, pixel by pixel. I called the police immediately after I finished looking through the images. The operator was polite but cautious, asking about the camera's location and whether I felt in immediate danger. I told them I wasn't sure, I just needed someone to come and take a look. While I waited, I tried to piece together any clues. Had I noticed anyone lurking in the laneway? Suspicious neighbors? A stranger on the fire escape? Nothing came to mind. I was careful about my routines, but I hadn't thought twice about the fire escape until now. A knock at the door jolted me. My heart slammed against my ribs so fiercely I thought it might be heard outside. I wasn't expecting anyone, especially not at this hour. Peering through the peephole, I saw a uniformed police officer. I opened the door, voice barely steady. The officer introduced himself and asked me to explain. I showed him the camera and the photos on my laptop. He nodded slowly, eyes scanning the images. Have you had any problems with anyone recently? Any threats? Arguments? Disputes with neighbors? I shook my head. No. Nothing at all. This is the first time I've felt like this. He took notes, then told me they would send a unit to check the area for any signs of surveillance equipment or suspicious individuals. He recommended I be cautious and suggested changing my locks if I felt unsafe. After he left, the apartment felt empty in a way that was almost physical. The walls seemed too close, the windows too exposed. I couldn't bring myself to look out through the curtains, knowing someone could have been looking right back at me for weeks. I spent the rest of the night checking the apartment over and over, locking and unlocking windows, pulling back the curtains, inspecting every nook and cranny. Nothing was out of place. No signs of forced entry, no hidden cameras, no footprints on the fire escape that I could see. But the knowledge was there, sharp and unyielding. Someone had been watching me. Someone had chosen me. I lay awake for hours. The images burned into my mind. The camera, sitting innocuously on the kitchen counter, was a silent reminder that privacy was an illusion, and that sometimes terror was not loud. It was quiet, invisible, and patiently waiting just beyond the glass. I didn't sleep much that night. By morning, I knew I had to find that memory card. I didn't want to believe that someone had been watching me, but the thought wouldn't let go. It was the kind of feeling you try to push away, but it lingers in the corners of your mind like a shadow. I left work early, telling my boss I wasn't feeling well. The city was basking in soft gold sunlight that day, the usual Monday bustle wrapping around me like a blanket. I took the tram to a small electronics shop a few blocks from my apartment. The owner was an older man, the kind of person who smelled faintly of old books and coffee, with thick glasses sliding down his nose. "Memory card?" I asked, holding the camera out. He nodded, took the camera from me, and disappeared into the back room. I waited, my heart pounding in that slow, steady way that happens when you're waiting for bad news or confirmation of your fears. When he came back, he handed me a tiny plastic case and smiled. "Found it. Looks like a micro SD." Back in my apartment, I inserted the card into my laptop's reader. The folder popped up instantly, photos, hundreds of them, all taken over the last several weeks. I scrolled through the first few images and stopped cold. There I was. Not just me, but the apartment window, my balcony, the hallway outside my door. The photos were taken from outside, at odd hours, different times of day, always showing me in moments when I wasn't aware. Some were of me coming home, tired and hunched under my coat. Others were of me sitting at my desk, sometimes even curled up reading on the couch. The framing was careful, tight enough to capture my face, but wide enough to show the interior of my apartment through the glass. I swallowed hard. Someone had been watching me every day, silently, invisibly. The photos were time-stamped, starting from August 1st, 2023, right up to September 10th, just 4 days before I found the camera. The consistency was chilling. The person hadn't missed a single day. I flicked through more pictures, heart pounding. In some, I could see the faint outline of a shadow behind the camera lens, tall, but always careful to stay just out of the frame. The photos were taken from various angles, suggesting the watcher moved along the corridor outside my apartment, or maybe around the building's courtyard. It was impossible to tell for sure. My hands trembled. I knew I had to call someone, but who? The police? Would they believe me? Would they even care if I told them someone had been spying on me? And what if the person was still out there, watching? I closed my laptop and tried to calm my breath. I paced the apartment, I starting to every window and door. The curtains I'd left drawn were thin and cheap, barely blurring the view outside. I pulled them shut tighter, feeling exposed and vulnerable. I thought about my neighbors. Had they noticed anything strange? Was someone else being watched? On a whim, I grabbed my phone and messaged my closest friend, Jess. She was practical, down to earth, and always good in a crisis. "Jess, I need to talk to you. ASAP. It's about something really weird. Can you come over?" Her reply was quick, of course. 30 minutes? I locked the door behind me as she arrived, double-checking the deadbolt twice. Jess's face went from curious to concerned as I showed her the photos. "That's unsettling," she said quietly. "Do you think it's someone you know?" I shook my head. "No. I can't imagine who. And the fact that the photos stopped a few days ago, maybe whoever it is, they got spooked. Or maybe they're watching still, just being more careful." Jess frowned. "Have you noticed anything odd? Suspicious people in the building? Strange noises? Anyone hanging around your door?" I thought back. There was a man in the lobby a few weeks ago, someone I hadn't seen before. He looked like he was waiting for someone, but when our eyes met, he quickly looked away. I thought nothing of it at the time, but now it felt like a clue. "Maybe you should report this," Jess said. "Even if they don't have proof, it puts the police on alert. And you should definitely get some kind of security cameras for your place. The idea of more cameras made me uneasy, but I didn't know what else to do. I agreed and started looking up options online, my mind racing. Later that night, I sat by the window, the curtains drawn but not fully closed. I couldn't stop thinking about the photos, about the silent observer lurking just beyond my sight. The city outside was alive with noise and light, but inside, I felt imprisoned by the invisible gaze. Every creak in the building made me jump, every shadow outside seemed to stretch closer. I kept my phone close, ready to call Jess or the police at a moment's notice. I wondered if the watcher was still out there, maybe even watching me now, just beyond the glass. The thought curled around my chest like a cold hand. I realized then that the real horror wasn't just the photos or the invasion of privacy. It was the knowledge that someone had been there all along, silently carving out my days and nights as their own strange, secret story. And for all I knew, this was only the beginning. September 14th, 2023. I kept the camera locked away in my desk drawer for 2 days after I found the memory card. I didn't want to look inside. Something about what I might see made my stomach knot tighter than usual. But by last night, curiosity outweighed dread. The small card was hidden in a compartment beneath the camera's battery, tucked away like a secret no one wanted discovered. I slipped it out with a fingernail and plugged it into my laptop, dreading the files I was about to find. Over 50 images appeared in a folder named simply Melbourne. The first few were blurry shots of street corners, trees, trams passing by. Then the images shifted, suddenly clearer, more focused. And then there I was. The realization hit like a punch to the gut. These were photographs taken from outside my apartment window, the same window I'd long assumed was private. Some were during the day, showing me sitting at my kitchen table, reading or typing on my laptop. Others were at night, when I thought the street was empty, the darkness shielding me. One picture showed me in pajamas, brushing my hair with a yellow comb. Another caught me taking the rubbish out. The angle perfectly framed me against the dull gray wall of the building next door, as if someone was hiding right there, watching. I scrolled through the images slowly, each one a quiet invasion. The timestamps on the files confirmed they stretched over 3 weeks, almost daily, sometimes twice a day. Whoever had taken them had been watching me for a long time. I tried to tell myself it was coincidence, that someone living nearby might have an angle onto my window. But these weren't accidental snapshots. Some of the photos were framed with care, centered, focused, capturing moments that no passerby should have noticed. I shut the laptop quickly, heart pounding. The room suddenly felt smaller, suffocating. There was no ghost or demon here. This was human. Someone was watching me, silently, patiently. Someone who knew exactly where I lived. My phone buzzed on the desk, breaking the tense silence. I glanced at the screen. A message from an unknown number. Nice photos. Thanks for the show. The words made my hands tremble. How had they found me? Did they know I had the camera? Did they know I found the photos? I didn't reply. I spent the night sitting awake, eyes fixed on the darkened window, listening for any sound, a footstep, a whisper, the faint scratch of a camera shutter. Melbourne seemed indifferent outside, but inside my apartment, I felt hunted. This morning, I went to the window and looked down. The street was busy and bright with morning light, people rushing to work, trams clattering by. I scanned the building opposite. There were windows, but most were closed, curtains drawn. Still, the thought that someone could be watching from there made me feel exposed, vulnerable in my own home. I decided to go to the police. It felt like the right thing to do, but also terrifying. What if they thought I was paranoid? What if they brushed it off as a prank? What if this person was watching the police station already? At the station, I handed over the camera and the memory card. The officer listened carefully, took notes, and promised to look into it. They said I wasn't the first to report something like this, that stalking and surveillance were serious matters. But walking back to my apartment, I felt no relief. The eyes on the other side of the window were invisible but heavy. The streets of Melbourne, once familiar, now felt like a maze watched by unseen predators. Back home, I checked the locks on every door and window, pulled the curtains tight, and sat with my back to the wall, waiting for the night to come again. The hours crawled by, each tick of the clock amplifying the silence that had settled around me like a thick fog. My phone buzzed once, a message from an unknown number. Hesitant, I swiped it open. It read simply, "You can't hide." No signature, no explanation. Just those 6 chilling words. My heartbeat quickened, the cold sweat prickling my skin. Someone was not only watching but also tormenting me, making sure I knew it. I considered going back to the police, but doubt gnawed at me. What if they dismissed this as paranoia? What if it escalated beyond their control? The city felt less like a sanctuary and more like a trap, the familiar hum of daily life now a sinister soundtrack to my unease. Desperate for some semblance of normalcy, I forced myself to eat, but every bite felt like sand in my mouth. Sleep was even more elusive. Shadows seemed to stretch and twist in the corners of my vision, and every creak or distant footstep jolted me upright. I tried reasoning with myself. There had to be a logical explanation. Maybe a neighbor's late-night wanderings, or a trick of light reflecting off a passing car window. But the message, that cryptic warning, anchored my fears in something far more personal. My phone buzzed again. Another message, "Stop looking, or you'll regret it." The words were like ice splintering through bone. I shut the screen down, stuffing the device into a drawer as if that would make the threat disappear. But the dread clung to me, a suffocating shroud. I knew I couldn't stay locked away forever. Tomorrow, I have to step outside, face the city's restless gaze. But tonight, I was a prisoner within my own home, haunted by the invisible eyes that watched from the shadows, waiting for me to slip up. Somewhere out there, someone was pulling the strings, and I had no idea how to stop them. The moment I slipped the memory card from the camera and slid it into my laptop, the screen blinked to life with a series of images that immediately knotted the pit in my stomach tighter. The first few pictures showed the outside of my apartment building, taken from across the street or from behind the thick canopy of trees lining the sidewalk. They could have been innocent snapshots, curious shots of the architecture or the changing seasons. But as I scrolled down, the angle shifted, becoming unnervingly focused, zooming in on my apartment window. I stopped cold when I saw the next photo. It was a picture of me, standing just inside the living room, pulling a shirt over my head. The image was grainy, shot from the other side of the glass. The window was framed by creeping ivy, but the camera had zoomed in enough to capture the expression on my face, an unguarded moment, entirely private. I swallowed hard, eyes starting to the window beside me, as if I could see a shadow lurking there. I clicked through the rest with trembling fingers, the photos chronicling weeks, maybe months, of surveillance. Some showed me entering and leaving the apartment, others caught me sitting at the kitchen table, sometimes on the phone, sometimes looking out the window, unaware of being watched. There were photos taken at all times of day and night, some even catching me through the reflection of a mirror. The sheer volume of images was disorienting. I had no idea this had been happening. I shut the laptop abruptly, heart pounding. The room suddenly felt unbearably small and exposed. I moved to the window, pulling back the curtain just enough to peer into the street. Everything looked normal, passers-by going about their day, a dog walker heading down the sidewalk, a man in a high-visibility jacket tying his shoelace. None of them seemed out of place. But I knew better now. Someone had been out there, silently observing me week after week. I spent the afternoon replaying the images in my mind, trying to pinpoint when the surveillance might have started. There was one photo dated July 23rd, another from August 5th, and the last just a few days before I found the camera. That was at least 2 months of being watched without any clue. The thought that someone had been standing outside my building, waiting for the right moment, made my skin crawl. I felt violated. There was no way to sugarcoat it. This wasn't some casual passerby snapping pictures. It was a calculated act of intrusion. I thought about calling the police, but what would I say? That I found a camera with creepy photos on it? Would they take me seriously? I had no idea who the person was, no idea where they might be now. But I couldn't keep pretending this wasn't happening. I decided to check with my neighbors first. Downstairs, Mrs. Patel opened her door before I could even knock. Her sharp eyes softened when she saw the expression on my face. "Is everything all right, dear?" she asked, clutching her shawl tighter. I hesitated but then explained about the camera and the photos, expecting her to dismiss it as a misunderstanding or some harmless prank. Instead, she frowned and nodded gravely. "You're not the first. There's been strange activity around here for a while now. I've seen a man loitering near the mailbox late at night. Thought it was just some kid messing about. Did you report it?" She shook her head. "No one takes us seriously. I'm old, and by myself mostly. What could I do?" Her words echoed my own feelings of helplessness. Back in my apartment, I started securing the place. I checked all the locks, tightened the bolts on the windows, and closed the curtains, turning my home into a fortress of desperation. But even as I did, a nagging doubt gnawed at me. If this person had been watching me for months, how many other things had they noticed? What else had they been recording? Later that evening, I sat by the window, a book in hand but unable to focus. I kept glancing outside, half expecting to catch a glimpse of a lurking figure. The street outside was quiet, the usual buzz of the city seemed distant, muted. I realized then that I was living in constant suspense, the kind that erodes your sanity slowly, like water dripping onto stone. Sleep was elusive that night. Every creak of the building, every rustle of leaves felt like an ominous sign. I kept the lights on, the curtains drawn tight, and the door locked. The camera and its haunting contents had changed everything. In the days that followed, I tried to piece together any clues about who might have done this. The building's security cameras were outdated and spotted with dead zones near the entrance. The landlord's office was unhelpful, dismissing my concerns with a distracted wave. The building was old, with many transient residents and visitors. I started to keep a journal, documenting every sound, every shadow that seemed suspicious. I changed my routines, taking different routes to work, varying the times I left and returned. But the fear was not just about being watched anymore, it was about losing control of my own life. One afternoon, while on my way home, I noticed a man standing across the street, leaning against a lamppost, his gaze fixed in my direction. Our eyes met for a second, and he turned away quickly. I couldn't get a clear look at his face, but something about the way he moved felt deliberate, calculated. I quickened my pace and avoided eye contact, heart racing. That night, I barely slept. The image of that man burned into my mind. I knew this was far from over. The camera, the photos, the unknown watcher lurking just beyond my window, it had become a silent stalker, threading its way into the fabric of my everyday life. And I was left wondering how close he really was, and how much longer I could keep him out. I sat at my kitchen table with the camera in front of me, a cup of lukewarm tea growing cold beside the screen of my laptop. The memory card was small, a tiny black rectangle that held more dread than I wanted to admit. I had taken it out of the camera the night before, after the initial shock wore off enough to let me act. The camera itself was an older model, a Canon power shot that looked like it had been used more than cared for. The real terror was in what the memory card contained. I clicked through the files slowly, each image a slice of time captured without my knowledge or consent. The photos were taken from outside my apartment building, some clearly from the street, others from the alleyway that ran alongside the block. They revealed me in moments both mundane and private, watering the plants on the balcony, opening the mail in the hallway, even sitting near the window in my pajamas, staring blankly at the city below. As I scrolled, a knot tightened in my stomach. The dates on the timestamps spanned the last 6 weeks, photos taken almost daily, at different times of day. Some were blurry, as if the person was moving quickly or trying to stay hidden, but others were sharp and deliberate. My face, my apartment, my life laid bare by a stranger's lens. The most unsettling part was realizing how close they must have been. The angle suggested someone knew the exact spots where I'd be standing or sitting. The person wasn't just a casual observer, they were careful, methodical. I tried to remember if I'd seen anyone lurking around, any strange cars idling near the building, unfamiliar faces on the street. But nothing had stood out. Or maybe I hadn't wanted to see. I pushed the chair back and stood, pacing the kitchen as the weight of the discovery pressed on me. What did I do now? Who was watching me? How long had they been doing this without me knowing? And, most terrifyingly, why? I had to tell someone. My mind jumped to the police, but I hesitated. Would they even take me seriously? A woman alone, claiming she'd been watched and photographed? What if they thought I was overreacting? Or worse, what if this was just the beginning? I looked down at the camera again. It had been left on the ground, right outside my building, in plain sight. Was that a mistake? Or some kind of taunt? Had the watcher wanted me to find it? To know I was being watched? The thought made my skin crawl. I sat back down, opened a new document on my laptop, and started typing a detailed account of everything I'd found. Dates, times, locations, feelings. I had to keep a record, something to anchor me to reality amid the growing paranoia. The silence of the apartment felt oppressive. Every creak, every distant footstep echoed too loudly in my ears. I kept glancing toward the window, half expecting to see a shadow, a face, someone's eyes fixed on me. I forced myself to focus on the photos again. One image caught my attention, taken on a rainy afternoon 2 weeks earlier. I was on the balcony, holding a cup of coffee, staring out at the street. The camera's perspective was from the alley, just low enough that the person must have been crouching behind the dumpsters, hidden by the overgrown shrubs. The level of detail was chilling. You could see the expression on my face, the steam rising from the cup, the droplets sliding down the glass railing. I felt exposed, violated. A sudden knock at the door made me jump. My heart pounded as I approached and peered through the peephole. No one was there. Just the empty hallway. I opened the door a crack, looking out onto the corridor, but saw nothing. The hallway was empty and silent. My hands trembled as I closed the door and locked it. Who had knocked? Was it a neighbor? Or the watcher, testing me? The thought was unbearable. I sat back down and tried to calm my racing thoughts. Maybe I was overthinking. Maybe it was just someone else's bad luck or coincidence. But the photos said otherwise. I remembered the conversation with my neighbor, Mrs. Patel, from a few days ago. She had mentioned seeing a man loitering near the entrance late at night but hadn't thought much of it. I decided to ask her more when I saw her next. The rest of the day passed in a blur of half-hearted attempts at work and moments of frozen panic. Every time I glanced toward the window, I imagined the camera lens hidden in shadows, watching me still. That evening, I made a plan. I would install a security camera outside my apartment door, the hallway, the entrance. something that would catch anyone lurking. I couldn't live like this, uncertain and afraid. I needed to fight back, to reclaim my sense of safety. As I set up the new camera, I realized how much I had taken my privacy for granted. I had never thought twice about the windows facing the street, the easy access strangers had to glimpses of my life. Now, every small detail felt like a vulnerability. That night, I barely slept. I kept checking the front door, the window. The city outside was no longer just noise and light, it was a reminder of the eyes watching, waiting. I knew the nightmare wasn't over. But this time, I was ready to see it through. Tomorrow, I would go to the police. With the photos, the camera, my record. I had to make sure this watcher knew that I was not invisible, that I was no longer the prey, but the one who was watching back. Story 3. Vanishing jogger finds threatening messages during morning runs. I used to think that running early in the morning was the safest part of my day. My route was a loop of about 5 kilometers, starting near my apartment in the Carmes district, winding along the water's edge, then cutting through the quieter neighborhoods before circling back. I'd been running this path for over a year, and it had become a kind of sanctuary, a place where the noise of the city and the stress of work faded behind the steady beat of my heart and the cadence of my feet on the pavement. That morning, I set out around 6:30 a.m., the city still stretching out from its overnight slumber. I passed the old stone bridge, the one arching gracefully over the canal, where the early sun cast long shadows over the cobbled streets. I was halfway through my run when I noticed something unusual, a small envelope tucked just beneath the edge of a weathered bench by the canal's edge. At first, I thought it was simply litter, but something about the way it was positioned caught my eye. It wasn't crumpled or dirty, just carefully placed, almost deliberate. I slowed down, curiosity getting the better of me. The envelope was plain, off-white, unmarked except for my initials, EV, scrawled in neat handwriting on the front. I paused for a moment, feeling an odd flutter in my chest. My mind raced with possibilities. Someone knew me well enough to leave this here? Or was it a coincidence? I hesitated before opening it. Inside, I found a folded piece of paper, densely covered in sharp black ink. The words were chillingly precise. You think you run alone. You don't. The note sent a shiver through me. I looked around quickly, but the canal path was still mostly deserted, bathed in soft morning light. A few joggers passed by at a distance, but none close enough to be watching me. I stuffed the note into my pocket, my pace quickening as I tried to shake off the unease that had settled in my stomach. For the rest of the run, I was distracted, glancing anxiously over my shoulder, imagining shadows where there were none. When I finally reached my apartment, I locked the door behind me and tried to tell myself it was a prank, someone's idea of a joke. Maybe a neighbor playing around, or a stranger who had found my initials somewhere. But I couldn't ignore the feeling that someone was watching me. The next morning, I debated whether to go for a run at all. I considered skipping it, taking a different route, or even running with my phone in hand. In the end, my routine won out. I needed that run to clear my head, even if it now felt tainted. I left the apartment at the same time, the streets still quiet, the early birds just starting their day. I noticed nothing at first, but as I neared the same bench, my eyes caught another envelope, this one taped to the underside of the bench's armrest. I stopped, heart pounding, and carefully peeled it free. The handwriting was the same, but the message had changed. Watching your every step. You cannot hide. A cold sweat broke out across my skin despite the cool morning air. My mind reeled. Someone was following me. Someone who knew exactly where I ran, when I ran, and was making sure I knew it too. I shoved the note into my pocket and ran faster than I had all week, desperate to get home. When I locked the door behind me, I felt exposed, vulnerable, as if my sanctuary had been invaded. Over the next few days, the notes kept appearing, always in the same spot along the path. Each one was more unnerving than the last, carefully placed in a way that I couldn't miss. Sometimes taped under benches, other times wedged between stones or attached to tree branches with a single piece of string. The messages were precise, almost clinical in their delivery, but each one was designed to make me feel smaller, watched, and controlled. There was no yelling, no crude threats, just cold certainty that I was being monitored. Your morning runs are mine now. Every turn you take is noted. You cannot outrun me. I told myself not to react, to stay calm, but the effect was the opposite. I began to check over my shoulder every few steps, scanning the shadows for movement. I started running with my phone on loud, turning on the GPS tracker so friends could see where I was. I tried to run different routes but found the notes again in new locations, as if the watcher was learning and adapting to my changes. I stopped telling people at work or with friends. Who would believe me? A stranger leaving notes? It sounded like paranoia. Besides, explaining meant revealing my fear, and I wasn't ready for that. One evening, I decided to report the harassment to the police. I took photographs of the notes and showed them to the officer at the local station. He was polite but skeptical, advising me to avoid isolated areas and to run with someone else if possible. He said that unless the messages escalated to direct threats or physical harm, there wasn't much they could do. That night, I lay awake, the dark outside pressing in against my window. I felt unsure if I was being watched through the glass, or if I was twisting a normal feeling of unease into something worse. The notes had stopped appearing for a day, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the watcher was still out there. I began to question everything about my routine. The route I had run for months, the places I used to find peaceful and familiar, all transformed into a course mapped out by someone else. Who were they? How long had they been watching me before I noticed? What did they want? It was terrifying to feel hunted in a city I thought I knew. The notes were a puzzle, each message a piece of a sinister game I hadn't agreed to play. Despite the fear, a part of me couldn't stop running, couldn't give up the one freedom I still had. But each time I stepped outside, the shadow of that unknown figure lengthened in my mind, and I wondered how long I could keep running before the watcher caught me. I remember the exact moment I realized this wasn't random. The morning was crisp, a slight chill in the air despite the early spring sun climbing over the rooftops. I was about halfway through the loop, approaching the old stone bridge again. My breathing was steady, the sound of my footsteps echoing softly against the stones. That's when I noticed the second envelope. It was wedged behind a loose brick in the canal wall, its edges peeking out like a secret waiting to be uncovered. I stopped and pulled it free, my fingers trembling slightly. This one was different from the first. The paper was rougher, and the handwriting inside was jagged, like the writer was barely holding themselves together. The note read, "I see you. You don't know me, but I know you. I know where you go. This is no accident." My heart hammered in my chest. I scanned the path behind me, expecting to see someone, anyone, but I was alone. The city was waking up around me, birds chirping, the distant rumble of morning traffic, but nothing out of place. I stuffed the note into my pocket, forcing myself to keep moving. The rest of the run blurred. My legs felt heavier, my breath coming in shorter bursts. Every shadow seemed deeper, every rustle from the bushes a threat. When I reached the quieter neighborhood streets, I slowed further, my eyes darting to every corner, every alleyway. I passed the corner cafe where I sometimes stopped for a coffee after my run. The owner was setting out chairs, nodding a good morning to me, unaware of the storm building in my mind. I wanted to tell someone, but who? The police? They probably think I was overreacting. A jogger's paranoia. But I knew I wasn't imagining this. Back home, I closed the door behind me and locked it with a click that felt unusually loud. I sat at the kitchen table, unfolding the 2 notes again. The handwriting was unsettling. It didn't belong to any style I recognized. The words were simple but heavy, like a promise warning of what was to come. That afternoon, I decided to change my routine. I told myself it would calm me, taking a different route through a busier part of the city. But as evening fell and I prepared for bed, a gnawing unease settled in my stomach. The notes weren't just threats, they were a game. Whoever was doing this wanted to keep me guessing, keep me afraid. The next morning, I forced myself out the door. I took the usual route anyway. I couldn't let fear dictate my life. But as I approached the bridge again, I saw it. Another envelope. This one was taped to the underside of the bench, in plain sight if you looked close enough. My hands shook as I peeled it loose. The message inside was worse than before. You're not alone. I'm closer than you think. Watch your back. It wasn't just words on paper anymore. It felt like someone was stalking me, marking their presence like a predator. I ran faster, not stopping until I was back in my apartment. I locked every door and window, checked them twice. My phone stayed in my hand, ready to dial if anything happened. I tried to call a friend, but my voice cracked, and I hung up before I said a word. Sleep was impossible. Every creak in the building, every distant noise made my heart leap. I kept replaying the notes, searching for clues, patterns, anything that might tell me who was doing this or why. Days passed like this. The notes grew more frequent and more disturbing. One morning, I found a photo tucked into the sleeve of a tree branch, a picture of me, taken from behind, running along the canal. My stomach sank. Someone had been following me, watching my every move. I reported the photo to the police, but all they could do was file a report. Without a clear suspect or evidence beyond the notes and the photo, there was little they could do. I felt trapped between fear and frustration, my sanctuary now a cage. Work became a blur. I avoided going out unless necessary, and even then, my eyes scanned every face, every shadow. The city, once vibrant and comforting, had turned hostile. I stopped running altogether, the path now a reminder of my vulnerability. One evening, as I locked up my apartment, I noticed a small package slipped under the door. Inside was a single, chilling phrase written on a piece of cardboard: "This is just the beginning." I realized then that this was no random act of menace. The person behind this had planned it carefully, studied my habits, and intended to break me down slowly. The isolation, the fear, they were weapons. I reached out to a local self-defense class the next day, hoping for some measure of control over the situation. I needed to reclaim my life, piece by piece. But the shadow of the unknown stalker loomed large, a constant reminder that the city's streets were no longer my refuge but a stage for someone else's dark game. Every morning, as I looked out my window at the familiar streets of Toulouse, I wondered when the next note would appear, what it would say, and how much longer I could hold on before the fear swallowed me whole. Each day blurred into the next, tension tightening its grip. Yet, beneath the dread, a spark of defiance flickered. I wasn't ready to be their pawn. April 14th, 2023. The next morning, I woke with a pit in my stomach I couldn't shake. I'd spent the previous day replaying the notes in my head, their words like a dark whisper trailing behind every step I'd taken along the canal. I told myself it was just someone's sick joke, but part of me knew better. My instincts had never steered me wrong before. I tried to push the fear down as I laced up my running shoes. The sun was barely up, and the streetlights still flickered as I stepped outside. The city felt different that morning, as if it held its breath, waiting. I started my run at the usual pace, the rhythm of my feet against the pavement a small comfort. The familiar sight stretched out before me, the stone bridge glinting faintly under the early light, the quiet chatter of sparrows and the bare trees lining the canal. But my eyes kept darting to every shadow, every crack in the pavement, every place where something could be hidden. When I reached the bench where I had found the first note, my breath caught. There, tucked just beneath the wooden slat, was another envelope. My hand trembled as I pulled it out. This time, the envelope was sealed with a thin strip of black tape and my name was scrawled on the front in uneven, jagged letters. I tore it open slowly. Inside was a folded piece of paper. The handwriting was different, messier, more frantic. The message read, "I see you. You think you're alone, but you're not. Every step you take, I'm there. Watching. Waiting. Don't turn around." A cold shiver ran down my spine, and my legs felt suddenly heavy. For a moment, I considered throwing the paper into the canal and running home, never looking back. But I didn't. Instead, I folded the note carefully and stuffed it into my pocket. I forced myself to keep moving. The rest of the run passed in a haze. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to catch a glimpse of someone, anyone following me. But the paths were empty, the quiet interrupted only by my own breath and the distant hum of the city waking up. When I reached the point where the path veered through the quiet residential streets, I slowed down again. That's when I saw it, a small piece of paper taped to a lamppost. I stopped and crept closer. The note was printed in bold, capital letters, "You can't hide forever." My heart pounded so loud I thought it might burst. I scanned the street. No sign of movement. No sign of anyone nearby. But the weight of that message settled heavily on me, heavier than the note itself. I spent the next hour trying to convince myself that this was all just a prank. Toulouse was a big city. Weird things happened. Maybe some bored teenager was trying to scare some random runner. But the precision, the way the notes followed me exactly on my route, it felt too calculated. When I got back to my apartment, I locked every door, every window, double-checked the deadbolt. I called a friend, Marie, and told her what was happening. She listened patiently and promised to come over the next morning to run with me. That night, sleep was a distant memory. I kept waking up at odd hours, heart racing, convinced I heard footsteps outside. The shadows in my apartment seemed to twist and lengthen, mocking me. The next morning, Marie was waiting at the entrance to the Carmes district. Her presence was a small balm to my frayed nerves. We set out together, moving at a slower pace than usual. I kept my eyes peeled for anything unusual, anything out of place. At the bench by the canal, I hesitated. Marie noticed the tension in my shoulders and gave me an encouraging smile. "We'll get through this," she said softly. That's when I noticed it, a thin black string tied around one of the bolts on the bench. Attached was a small, folded note. I reached for it, my fingers numb. Marie looked over my shoulder as I unfolded the paper. The words were written in red ink, "You're not safe. Not here. Not ever." A chill ran through me. Marie's face went pale, but she kept holding my arm. We decided to cut the run short and head back. On the way, I kept glancing down every alley, every shadow. The city felt less like a home and more like a trap. Back at the apartment, I called the police. The officer on the line was polite but skeptical. "We'll send someone around to check the area," she said. "But unfortunately, unless there's physical evidence or a direct threat, it's hard to act on notes alone." I wanted to argue, to push harder, but I knew she was right. Without a clear suspect or any proof beyond the notes, I was on my own. That afternoon, I changed my routine. I took a taxi downtown, ran a different route, and avoided the canal. But no matter where I went, the feeling of being watched clung to me like a second skin. Later that evening, as I sat by my window, the city lights flickering in the dusk, I found another envelope slipped under my door. No name, no tape, just a simple, white envelope. With trembling hands, I opened it. Inside was a single sentence, typed on a plain sheet of paper: "I know where you live." I dropped the note onto the floor. The room was suddenly too small, too quiet. I realized then that this wasn't just some random prank. This was someone's game. And I was the only player. For the first time in weeks, I felt truly trapped, not by walls or locks, but by a presence I couldn't see and didn't know. A presence that had followed me, studied me, and now threatened the very place I called home. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat with the curtains drawn, every sound outside amplified in my ears. The city of Toulouse, so alive by day, felt like a maze of shadows and whispers by night. Somewhere out there, someone was watching, waiting, and I had no idea what they wanted. But one thing was clear: I couldn't run forever. Dawn had barely broken when an unsettling chill crept over me, shattering the calm of my usual morning routine. I woke up with a dull ache in my chest, a tightness I couldn't shake. The night had been restless, too many thoughts swirling, too many half-formed plans for how to just stop this. But the sun was already up, and despite the knot of fear in my stomach, I knew I'd have to face the morning run again. It felt like the only way to reclaim some small piece of normalcy in a world that had suddenly spun off its axis. I laced up my shoes, double-checked my phone for any messages, and stuffed my keys into the pocket of my jacket. The air outside was cool and sharp, the kind of crispness that usually woke me up, but today it felt like a weight pressing down. I stuck to my usual route, head down, ears tuned to the rhythm of my breath and the pounding of my feet on the pavement. At the bench by the canal, the same one where I'd found the first envelope, I slowed again. I didn't want to look, but I had no choice. There, tucked beneath the slats, was a folded piece of paper, the edges clean, freshly creased as if someone had just put it there. My hands trembled as I pulled it out. This note was different from before. The handwriting was jagged, hurried, almost frantic, unlike the neat script I'd seen earlier. The message was short, but it cut deeper. Why do you pretend the city belongs to you? This path is mine. Remember that. A shiver ran down my spine, but I refused to let it control me. I stuffed the note into my jacket and kept moving. I couldn't stop wondering who this person was. How long had they been following me? How much did they know? I tried to focus on the familiar sights, the old stone bridge, the sleepy cafes just starting to open, the early risers walking dogs or sipping coffee, but the shadows felt sharper, the streets narrower. As I ran through the narrow side streets of Carmes, I noticed something else, a small scrap of paper in the gutter near the bakery, half hidden beneath a scattering of leaves and dirt. My heart thudded painfully in my chest as I bent down and picked it up. This one was typed, not handwritten. You see me, but you do not see me. I see everything. You cannot hide. My breath caught. The words weren't just threatening, they were personal, invasive. It was like someone was inside my skin, watching me from just out of sight. I forced myself to keep going, to finish the loop. I told myself it was a game, a sick joke, but the fear was real. I could feel it burning beneath my skin, a cold fire that refused to die down. Back at the apartment, I locked every door and window, checked the peephole twice before stepping out to grab the mail. There was nothing unusual, no letters, no packages, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the next message was waiting just around the corner, somewhere between the spaces I didn't see. That night, I barely slept. Every creak in the building, every distant shout or car horn sounded like a warning. I kept the balcony door locked, the curtains drawn tight. The next morning, I made a decision. I wouldn't run my usual route. I'd alter it, take a different path through the city, even if it meant losing the familiarity I craved. I needed to see if this person was truly stalking me or if the notes were some cruel coincidence. I set out later than usual, the streets warmer and busier. The sun was higher, casting short shadows. For the first 2 kilometers, nothing happened. No envelopes, no scraps of paper. Relief began to bloom, tentative and fragile. Then, near a small park I hadn't visited before, I saw a folded map, pinned to a tree trunk with a single rusty nail. My heart nearly stopped. I approached cautiously, my hands shaking as I lifted the paper. It was a map of the city, crudely drawn, with a red line marking a path that started at my apartment and wound through various neighborhoods. Little symbols, circles, arrows, question marks were scrawled along the route, and in the corner, a message. Watch your steps. You're being watched. The next move is yours. I felt sick. This wasn't random anymore, it was deliberate, calculated. Someone had spent time tracking me, mapping my life like a puzzle to be solved. I folded the map with trembling fingers and tucked it into my jacket. My mind raced. Was this a threat? A challenge? A twisted invitation? And what would happen if I ignored it, or worse, if I tried to involve the police? I spent the rest of the day pacing inside, staring out at the street below. Every passerby seemed suspicious, every shadow a potential watcher. I wanted to call someone, to scream, to cry, but the words caught in my throat. What if no one believed me? What if this person was closer than I imagined? That evening, as the city lights flickered on, I found myself back at the bench by the canal. Against my better judgment, I sat down and pulled out the notes, laying them carefully on my lap. I read them again, one by one. Why do you pretend the city belongs to you? This path is mine. Remember that. You see me, but you do not see me. I see everything. You cannot hide. Watch your steps. You're being watched. The next move is yours. The words were like poison, seeping into my bones. They were a reminder that no matter how far I ran, how fast or how far, this person was always there waiting, watching, planning. I didn't know what to do next. But I knew one thing, I couldn't let this fear control me. I folded the notes once more, stuffing them into my jacket pocket, and stood up. The city was waking up around me, indifferent to my terror. I started to run again, faster this time, heart pounding not just from the exertion but from the fight inside me, the fight to take back my streets, my life, my peace. But deep down, I knew the game was far from over. Morning runs had always felt like my sanctuary, until the day they didn't. The dawn was still a pale glow when I stepped out of my apartment. The usual hum of Toulouse waking up was subdued, blending with the cool morning air that smelled faintly of rain and freshly cut grass. The streets felt emptier than usual, or maybe I was just more aware of everything now, the way the shadows stretched longer, the way even the birds seemed quieter. I tried to steady my breathing as I laced up my shoes by the door, my fingers trembling slightly. For the first time in days, I hesitated before heading out. The notes hadn't stopped, not since the one I found 3 mornings ago shoved beneath a loose stone near the canal. It had been more than a message. It was an intrusion, a crack in the fragile sense of safety I had built around my runs. The words had been precise, chilling in their calmness. You see me, but you don't see me. I remember reading it twice, heart pounding, the paper trembling between my fingers. It wasn't just a threat. It was a game, and I was the unwilling player. Still, I needed to run. I needed to maintain some semblance of normalcy, even if every step felt heavy with dread. I set off down my usual route, the familiar rhythm of footfalls against pavement trying to soothe the knot in my stomach. The canal was quiet, the water reflecting the pale sky. I forced my eyes ahead, ignoring the bushes lining the path where I now found myself scanning for anything out of place. Halfway through, near the old stone bridge, I slowed. My gaze landed on a small piece of paper tucked under a crack in the cobblestones. My throat tightened before I bent down and retrieved it. The note was folded neatly, edges crisp as if it had been freshly made, despite the chill. I unfolded it carefully, revealing a short message typed in a stark, sans serif font. I am closer than you think. Watch the shadows after the sun. A shiver ran through me. The message wasn't just a taunt. It was evidence. Someone was following me, tracking my every move on this route I had thought was mine. I looked around quickly, but the early morning was still, almost unnervingly so. I tucked the note into my pocket, speeding up. My heartbeat wasn't just from exertion anymore, it was fear, palpably close. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was someone lonely, someone craving attention, maybe a disturbed mind playing cat and mouse. But the precision, the timing, this wasn't random. Whoever it was had prepared for me, waited for me, and had been watching for days. I decided to alter my route on the way home, taking a detour through the busier streets of Carmes, passing cafes that would soon be opening, hoping the presence of others might offer some invisible shield. I sent a quick text to my friend Camille. Something's wrong. Someone's been leaving me notes on my run. I'm scared. No reply. The silence echoed louder than any words could. Later that morning, I sat at my kitchen table, the note from the bridge under a glass paperweight, an attempt to make it less real, less threatening. My phone lay beside it, the screen dark. I wanted to call the police but hesitated. What could I tell them? That someone was following me? That they left cryptic messages? Would they take it seriously without concrete proof? And what if this person stopped if they knew I was being watched? I was trapped between wanting to scream for help and fearing that any attention would escalate things. The rest of the day passed in a haze. I couldn't focus on work, couldn't shake the feeling of unseen eyes on me. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart jumped, anticipating a message, a call, or worse. That evening, Camille finally called back. Her voice was sharp, worried. You need to go to the police, Claire. This isn't just some prank. I know, I whispered. But what if it gets worse? What if they see that I'm scared? We'll figure it out. You're not alone. Her words were a lifeline, fragile but real. That night, I lay awake, curtains drawn tight, listening to the distant sounds of the city. The notes, the watching, it felt like my life had become a shadow play, each move measured by someone who wanted to unsettle me down to my core. And the worst part was that I didn't know who it was. A stranger? Someone I passed every day without a second glance. A neighbor? The thought made my skin crawl. I realized that the simple act of running, something that had once been freedom, was now a trap. Every step I took was shadowed by fear, every familiar corner hiding potential menace. The notes were no longer just pieces of paper. They were marks of possession, warnings etched in ink and hidden in the world I thought I controlled. As dawn broke again, I resolved not to run tomorrow. Not until I had answers, until I knew who was out there in the shadows, watching me. But part of me already knew this was far from over. The weight of silence pressed down as I waited, heart pounding in the stillness. Shadows shifted with the rising sun, and the city seemed alive with secrets I was only beginning to understand. Whatever was coming next, I had to be ready not just to survive, but to fight back. Story 4, Nightmare Encounter with Unknown Prowler near Campsite. The wind had been relentless all day, a constant, biting presence that swept across the ridge and whistled through the sparse pines scattered thinly across the rocky ground. We'd set out early that morning from the nearest village, eager for a weekend away from the city's suffocating noise and the endless hum of Beijing's streets, where I'd spent the last 3 years working as an expat translator. My friends Liam, Sarah, and Tom were all as keen for the escape as I was. None of us had ever camped this far from civilization before. We'd chosen a spot that felt remote, perhaps even too remote, considering none of us had signal on our phones. But that was the point. Just us, nature, and the quiet. I remember the first time I noticed it, though I didn't want to admit it to myself then. While we were collecting firewood near the tree line, I thought I heard footsteps crunching on the gravel behind us, but whenever I turned, no one was there. Liam joked about it being deer or some other wildlife, but the sound was oddly deliberate, too rhythmic to be random. Still, I let it go, assuming my nerves were getting the better of me. Night fell quickly, much faster than I'd expected. The sky deepened from a fiery orange to a velvet navy, stars blinking into existence overhead. Liam and Tom busied themselves pitching the tents while Sarah and I gathered dry branches for the fire. The crackle and warmth of the flames brought some comfort, but I kept glancing beyond the perimeter of our small campsite, trying to catch sight of movement in the dark. Everything was silent except for the occasional pop and hiss of burning wood. Then, just as I was about to suggest we turn in for the night, I heard it, a faint but distinct crunching sound, like footsteps, circling somewhere beyond the tents. My heart jumped, and I froze for a moment, straining to listen. "Did you hear that?" I said quietly to Sarah, who was crouched by the fire. She looked up sharply. "Hear what?" "Footsteps. Outside. Around us." Sarah's expression tightened. "Probably an animal. Deer maybe." "No," I said, shaking my head. It sounded too steady. Like someone walking slowly, deliberately. We exchanged a look, and just then Liam and Tom emerged from the tent area, having finished setting up. "Did you guys hear anything?" I asked. Tom shrugged. "Nothing. Just the wind, I guess." But the footsteps came again, this time louder, slower. They moved in a circle, crunching over gravel and rustling through the dry leaves. It was disorienting, sometimes close, sometimes distant, always around us but never revealing a source. "Maybe we should shine the torches out there?" Sarah suggested, a hint of nervousness creeping into her voice. I nodded, but Liam shook his head. "No point. Whoever it is would just run off. Probably some local out here, farmers or hikers. We're not exactly hidden." Still, the unease was growing. My pulse quickened every time the footsteps circled, never breaking their rhythm. I found myself gripping the flashlight tighter, directing its beam into the darkness, trying to catch a glimpse of movement. The others tried to laugh it off, but I could tell we were all on edge. Even Tom, who was usually the most laid back of the group, seemed restless as he paced near the fire. Then, just as we were settling down to eat, a twig snapped sharply from the direction of the tree line. We all froze. The footsteps stopped. For a moment, silence. Then a low, deliberate voice whispered from the dark, "You shouldn't be here." I almost dropped my cup, and Sarah gasped. Liam and Tom stood up instantly, their bodies tense, eyes scanning the shadows. "Who's there?" Liam called out, trying to keep his voice steady. No answer. Only the sound of leaves rustling faintly as if someone was retreating, though their footsteps didn't fade away. Instead, they began to circle again, closer this time. We huddled together, every sense heightened. The fire seemed small and fragile against the growing darkness, and the forest felt like it was closing in around us. "I'm going to check it out," Liam said abruptly, grabbing the largest stick he could find. "No," I said quickly, "we don't know what's out there." but Liam was already moving toward the edge of the clearing. "Wait," Sarah said, standing up. "Take the flashlight." Liam nodded, flicked on the beam, and the beam cut through the dark. A figure stood just beyond the tree-line, half hidden behind a birch. The light caught the stranger's face, a man, probably in his 40s, lean and pale, his eyes dark and unreadable. "You're trespassing," he said quietly. "We didn't mean any harm," Liam replied, trying to keep his tone calm. "We're just camping." The man's gaze shifted slowly between the tents, the fire, us. "This land isn't for visitors. Especially not strangers." I felt my throat tighten. "We'll leave in the morning," I said, trying to sound reasonable. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, his eyes flicked to the forest behind him, then back to us. The silence stretched, thick with tension. Finally, he spoke. "I've been watching you. Since you arrived." The words hit me like a blow. "Why? What do you want?" He took a slow step forward, moving into the circle of light. "To make sure you understand where you are." We all exchanged uneasy glances. This wasn't just a local farmer concerned about trespassers. This was someone who'd been deliberately watching us, stalking us in the dark. The wind picked up again, rattling the branches overhead. The man's figure blurred in the flickering firelight as he watched us, silently waiting. "Please," Sarah said softly, "we'll pack up first thing." He said nothing more, just turned and melted back into the woods as silently as he had appeared, leaving only the echo of his footsteps behind. We didn't sleep that night. Every shadow seemed to move, every sound made us jump. I kept the flashlight close, listening for the crunch of footsteps circling once more, knowing that somewhere out there, someone was watching, waiting, and not ready to let us go. The night wrapped around us like a thick, suffocating blanket. At first, it was just a soft shuffle, almost imperceptible over the fire's crackling and the occasional murmur of my friends talking quietly. But then, as the minutes dragged on, the noise grew more distinct, sharper, deliberate, as if someone was pacing around our tents. I froze, my ears straining. The feeling in the pit of my stomach twisted into something colder, more insistent. "Did you guys hear that?" I whispered, turning to Liam and Sarah, who were seated just a few feet away. Tom paused mid-sip of his water bottle, the air suddenly thick with tension. "Hear what?" he asked, his voice low. "There, behind the tents." I nodded toward the dark fringe of trees and rocks that bordered our little clearing. "Footsteps. I'm pretty sure someone's circling us." Liam frowned and stood up, pulling his jacket tighter around his shoulders. "You're imagining things. Probably just an animal." "No," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. "It's too regular. It's not an animal." Sarah looked around nervously, her eyes sharp in the firelight. "Maybe it's just a deer or a fox. You know how sound plays tricks at night." But I wasn't convinced. The footsteps came again, slow and measured, stopping, then moving again, circling. It wasn't random. Whoever it was aware of us. Watching. "We need to check," Liam said, already reaching for his flashlight. His tone was tense but resolute. "Better safe than sorry." "Wait," I said quickly. "We should stay together." "No," Liam insisted. "If there is someone, we don't want to give away our position all at once." "I'll take a look." I shook my head. "No. We should all go." Tom stood up, placing a hand on Liam's shoulder. "Maybe we don't want to confront whoever it is. What if they're armed?" Sarah crossed her arms, eyes darting toward the darkness beyond our firelight. "Can't we just pack up quietly and leave?" The idea was tempting, but I was reluctant. We were miles from anywhere, and the prospect of hiking in the dark without proper gear wasn't appealing. Besides, if someone was out there, we needed to know what we were dealing with. "We stay put," I said firmly. "All together. If there's someone out there, we make sure they know we're not easy targets." The footsteps grew louder, closer. I could hear the faint scrape of boots or maybe heavy shoes against gravel and twigs. I felt my pulse quicken, every muscle taut, my breath shallow. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows, just at the edge of our firelight. The beam from Liam's flashlight illuminated a man, thin, tall, wearing a dark jacket and a cap pulled low over his face. His eyes gleamed in the light, unreadable and cold. For a moment, no one moved. The man stood perfectly still, as if waiting for us to make the first move. "Who are you?" Liam called out, his voice steady but edged with threat. The man didn't answer. Instead, he took a step forward, then another, closing the gap between us. His movements were slow, deliberate, almost predatory. Sarah gasped and instinctively reached for Tom's arm. "Stop right there," I said, my voice louder than I intended. "We don't want trouble, but leave now." The stranger paused, then in a low voice, surprisingly calm and deliberate, he said, "I've been watching you for hours." A chill ran down my spine. The words were simple, but the implication was terrifying. He had been stalking us, observing us from the shadows for who knew how long. "Why?" Tom demanded, stepping slightly in front of Sarah. The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked from each of us to the others, as if weighing us, calculating. Finally, he spoke, "This is my land. People like you trespassers, they don't belong here." The venom in his tone was unmistakable. "We didn't know," Liam said, trying to keep his voice calm, though I could hear the edge of fear beneath it. "We just wanted to camp, to get away for a bit." The stranger snorted, a harsh, humorless sound. "Get away? You brought your city ways into my hills. You think you can just come and set up camp like it's a park? What do you want from us?" I asked, trying to steady my voice. "We'll leave in the morning." He took a step closer, and I could smell the sharp scent of tobacco and something else, sour, metallic. "You're going to leave now," he said. "Pack up your things and get out. Or I'll make sure you never come back." The threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Sarah whimpered softly, and I felt a surge of protectiveness. But there was no mistaking the danger this man represented. We were outnumbered, outmatched, and completely exposed. Liam glanced at me, then back at the man. "We don't want any trouble," he said evenly. "We'll pack up first light." The man nodded once, sharply, and then retreated into the darkness, his footsteps fading until they were gone. We sat back down around the fire, hearts pounding, the night suddenly feeling colder and darker than before. "Who was that?" Sarah asked, voice trembling. "I don't know," I admitted honestly. "But I don't think he's just some angry local. There was something off about him." For the rest of the night, none of us slept. Every shadow seemed to shift and move, every sound set our nerves on edge. We took turns watching as the fire burned low, the silence almost unbearable. When dawn finally broke, pale and gray, we packed our gear in hurried silence. The man had vanished, but the memory of his eyes watching us remained, sharper and more terrifying than any creature of the dark. As we tramped back down the ridge toward the village, the weight of his presence lingered, a reminder that the wild isn't just nature. Sometimes, it's people, strangers who watch and wait in the dark, that are the real danger. I glanced back once, toward the place we'd left behind. Somewhere in the shadows, I knew he was still there, waiting. And that was the part that scared me most. That night, The wind had dropped to a brittle stillness, leaving the world outside our little camp more exposed than I'd imagined it would be. I wasn't the only one awake. Through the thin fabric, I could hear Liam's uneven breathing from the tent beside mine, and faintly, Sarah and Tom whispering in low voices. The others had tried to shrug off the unease, but I knew they were just as unsettled as I was. Maybe more. Then came the footsteps again. Soft, deliberate, circling. At first, I thought they might be coming from a deer or an animal, but the pattern didn't fit. The crunch of the gravel and twigs was too measured, too steady, like someone was deliberately walking around the perimeter of our camp. I sat up slowly, heart pounding in my throat, not wanting to alert the others just yet. My flashlight lay within reach, and I nudged it closer with my foot. Liam's voice broke the silence. "Did you hear that?" he whispered, voice low and cautious. I nodded, pressing my ear against the tent wall. The footsteps stopped suddenly, then resumed, this time moving closer. "Maybe it's just a fox," Sarah suggested, though her voice wavered. "You don't hear foxes tiptoeing like that," I responded. "And not in a circle." Tom was quiet, his breathing sharper now. I caught the faintest rustle of fabric. He was probably reaching for his knife or a flashlight. The footsteps began to circle once more. There was a strange rhythm to them, as if the person was taking deliberate care not to make too much noise, but still wanting to be heard. It sent a cold tingle down my spine. "Should we get out?" Liam asked, his voice hushed but tense. "Not yet," I said. "We need to see who it is first." We all unzipped our tents quietly and crawled out, sticking close to the fire. The glow was weak, but enough to cast long shadows across the rocky ground. The forest beyond was black, impenetrable. "I don't see anything," Sarah whispered, eyes wide. Then, a movement caught my eye just beyond the tree-line. A shadow shifted. A man stepped forward, his face half hidden under a dark hood, eyes reflecting the firelight. My breath caught in my throat. He was thin, wiry, and carried a small pack slung over one shoulder. His gaze was fixed on us, unreadable and cold. "Who are you?" Liam called out, trying to sound firm but calm. The man didn't answer. Instead, he took a slow step forward, the crunch of his boots crisp in the still night. "Hey, back off," I said, raising my voice, trying to sound braver than I felt. "This is private land. We're just camping." He stopped, just beyond the firelight's reach, and for a moment, I thought he might disappear into the woods. But then, with a sudden movement, he crouched down, pulling something from his pack, a small flashlight. He clicked it on, sweeping the beam across the tents and us, the sudden brightness burning into my eyes. "Why are you here?" Sarah demanded, taking a step forward. The man's voice was low and rough. "I've been watching. You shouldn't be here." "We're just passing through," Liam said, stepping in front of us protectively. "No harm meant." The man's eyes flicked to Liam, then back to me. "You think it's that simple? This land is mine. Been here longer than you. You don't belong." Something in the way he said it sent a chill through me. There was anger beneath the words, but also something darker, possessiveness, suspicion, a warning. "We didn't know," I said quickly. "We're sorry if we disturbed anything." He laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Sorry doesn't mean anything. Not out here." I glanced at the others. Tom was tense, fingers curled around the handle of his knife, ready if things got worse. Sarah was shaking slightly, but trying to stay brave. "We'll pack up at first light," Liam said. "No trouble." The man stood up slowly. He looked us over one more time, then nodded once. "Good. Because if I catch you out here after dark again, It won't be just words." And with that, he turned and vanished into the blackness of the forest. We stood there for a long moment, the weight of what had just happened settling over us. The fire popped and crackled, the only sound in the heavy night. "I can't believe that," Sarah finally said, voice trembling. "He was watching us the whole time." "Hours," I said, swallowing hard. "He was out there for hours." Liam shook his head, rubbing his forehead. "We should have known. This isn't some tourist trail. It's his land, and he's been watching." Tom paced the small clearing, eyes darting toward the trees. "We need to be careful," I said. "No more wandering off by ourselves. No more fires after dark." The reality hit me like a cold wave. We were not just visitors here, we were trespassers in someone else's world, and that someone had been watching us, studying us from the shadows. That night, sleep was impossible. Every sound made me jump, a twig snapping, the rustle of leaves, an owl calling out in the distance. Every time I closed my eyes, the man's face haunted me, sharp, wary, and deeply unsettling. By dawn, we were packed and ready to leave, moving quickly down the ridge with our hearts still racing. The islands had seemed like an ideal escape from the chaos of city life, but now I knew that the wilderness had its own dangers, ones that didn't come from animals or storms, but from people hidden just beyond the firelight. I haven't forgotten that night since. The way his eyes caught the fire's glow. The way he spoke as if we were intruders in his world, and as if he was waiting for us to understand the rules before it ended badly. I don't know what he wanted, exactly. Maybe he was just a man guarding his land. Or maybe he was something more dangerous, a man who had been alone here for too long, who saw strangers as threats. Either way, I knew one thing: when you're out here, the real horror isn't the wild, it's the people lurking in its shadows. The night was deeper now, the stars hidden behind thick clouds that muffled even the usual sounds of the islands. I wasn't alone in feeling uneasy. Sarah's usual calm seemed frayed, her eyes darted nervously toward the tree-line every few minutes. Liam and Tom tried to keep the mood light, tossing out jokes and stories, but even their laughter sounded forced. The isolation gnawed at us, and what had started as a welcome break from city life was twisting into something else, something raw and sharp. Then, the footsteps started again. They were soft at first, tentative, circling our camp with a careful, measured rhythm. I froze mid-sentence as the sound became unmistakable: footsteps, distinct and deliberate, moving slowly around our tents. The firelight flickered against the rough fabric, shadows pulsing. My heart thudded painfully in my chest. I caught Liam's eye, and his expression mirrored mine, alert, tense. Sarah whispered, "Did you hear that?" Her voice was barely audible, swallowed by the crackling fire. Tom shook his head but didn't look away from the darkness. "Probably an animal," he said, though even he sounded doubtful. But it wasn't an animal. No deer or fox walks so deliberately, so quietly, and so close to a campfire. The footsteps circled, pausing now and then, as if the person was sizing us up, testing our awareness. We sat frozen, breath shallow, every muscle coiled tight. My fingers itched for the small flashlight stashed inside my jacket pocket, but I resisted the urge. Shining a light into the darkness would announce our position, and whoever was out there could vanish in seconds. Then, a shadow shifted just beyond the firelight, a tall, thin figure standing motionless near the edge of the tree-line. For a moment, I thought it might be one of us playing a joke, but the tension was too real. No one moved or spoke. The shape seemed to watch us, unblinking and still. Liam finally broke the silence. "Who's there?" His voice was low, steady but carrying enough volume to reach beyond the fire's glow. "We're just campers. Leave us be." No answer came. The figure took a slow step forward, and the firelight caught the gleam of something metallic, a knife or a multi-tool. I wasn't sure. My throat tightened. Sarah whispered urgently, "We need to get inside the tents. Now!" We scrambled, fumbling for zippers and poles, hearts pounding loud enough to drown out the night sounds. I was the last one into my tent, the nylon flapping as I zipped it up tight. Darkness swallowed me whole, and the only sounds were the rapid thumps of my own breathing. Outside, the footsteps continued, pacing around the perimeter. The metal glint caught the firelight again, closer this time. I could hear the scrape of boots against rock and grass, slow, deliberate, circling us like predators sizing prey. The sound was maddening, close enough to be terrifying, too far to confront. For what felt like hours, the figure prowled, never breaking stride, always just beyond the faint glow of the dying fire. I tried to stay calm, reminding myself that we'd call for help if needed, that no one had tried to get inside the tents. Yet I couldn't shake the sensation of being watched, studied. Eventually, the footsteps faded, retreating back into the blackness. The silence that followed was oppressive, thick with unanswered questions and primal fear. We waited until the first weak light of dawn to unzip our tents, eyes scanning every shadow. There was no sign of the figure, no footprints or discarded items, just the trampled grass around the fire and the cold ashes. We packed quickly, haunted and unsettled, eager to leave the place that had been our refuge and turned into a trap. As we hiked back toward the village, I couldn't stop looking over my shoulder. The highlands were beautiful, but that night had shown me a darker side, the certainty that the wilderness, for all its majesty, could hide something far more dangerous than any animal. A person, watching, waiting. And that thought stayed with me long after we'd left the mountains behind. The village seemed strangely distant when we finally arrived, its familiar sights and sounds muted beneath the weight of our shared unease. The marketplace bustled as usual, children laughing and vendors shouting their wares, but we moved through it like shadows, our eyes darting to every window and alleyway. Even the warm glow of the hearth fires in the cottages offered little comfort. That evening, as I sat alone by the fire in the small room we had rented, the silence pressed in, thick and suffocating. I kept replaying the events over and over, the flicker of movement just beyond the ridge, the sudden snap of a twig, the way the shadows seemed to coil and twist like living things. Had it been a hunter? A lost traveler? Or something more sinister, something that didn't belong to this world? Sleep came only in fitful bursts, each time interrupted by dreams of eyes gleaming in the darkness, watching, unblinking. Morning brought no relief. The village felt smaller somehow, constricted by an invisible tension. I resolved to speak to the elders, hoping their wisdom could dispel the growing dread. But when I asked about the highlands, their faces tightened, voices dropping to whispers. "Old stories," one woman said, avoiding my gaze. "Warnings passed down through generations. The land remembers." It was clear then that the wilderness held secrets far older than we'd imagined, and that some places, no matter how beautiful, were best left undisturbed. As the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows over the cobblestones, I understood that our journey was not just a physical one. It had marked a crossing into something unknown, a threshold we might never fully cross back. The night deepened, folding around our small camp like a heavy blanket, the sky a dense black overhead interrupted only by the faint promise of stars. Earlier, Tom had joked about the footsteps we'd all heard, the ones circling our tents, rustling through the underbrush just beyond the firelight. "Probably some deer gawking at us," he'd said with a forced laugh. But the truth was, none of us were convinced. There was something about the rhythm, the way the sounds came and went, pausing and then resuming, as if whoever or whatever it was deliberately stalking us. I glanced at the other tents. Liam was dozing fitfully, Sarah had burrowed deep into her sleeping bag, and Tom was staring into the fire, his face pale in the glowing light. None of us had dared to step beyond the circle of firelight after sundown, and I could see why. Something felt wrong in the dark. It was then that I heard it again, the soft crunching of gravel underfoot, slow but steady, moving deliberately around the outer edge of the clearing, tracing a wide, cautious circle around our camp. My heart thudded painfully in my chest, loud enough I was sure the others could hear it. The footsteps were too measured to be an animal, and too close to be coincidence. I set down my half-empty bottle of water and stood, trying to be as quiet as possible. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, stepping closer to Liam's tent. Tom nodded, eyes wide. "Yeah. Whoever it is, they're circling us." His voice was low, tense. Sarah peeked out of her tent flap, face pale. "Should we call out? Maybe they'll go away if they know we're awake." I shook my head. "No. We don't know who or what it is. If this is someone watching us, we don't want to make ourselves easy targets." For a moment, we just stood there, listening. The footsteps had stopped. The world was suddenly very quiet except for the crackling fire, and even that seemed muted. Then, from the darkness on the far side of the camp, a faint rustle, a soft snap of a twig made us all freeze. Liam swallowed hard. "We need to do something," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not waiting for this to get worse." I nodded, heart pounding. I reached into my small backpack and pulled out the flashlight I'd packed, switching it onto a narrow beam of harsh white light. I aimed it toward the noise and called out, "Hey! We're awake. Show yourself." The beam swept slowly across the dark, bare trees, the rocky ground, the bushes edging our clearing. And then, just out of reach of the light, I caught a shadow move, a flicker of dark against dark, a shape crouching near the tree line. "Stop there," I said, voice steadier than I felt. "Who are you? What do you want?" The shape didn't move. Then, a low voice answered, rough and quiet, "I'm just passing through. Didn't mean to scare you." Tom stepped forward, flashlight trained on the figure. "Passing through? Around midnight? In the middle of nowhere? That's not a good story." The figure shifted, stepping slightly into the light. We could see a man, mid-30s maybe, wearing a hooded jacket and worn boots. His eyes flicked nervously between us, but he kept his hands where we could see them. "I've been watching your fire from the trees," he said. "Didn't want to get too close. Just figured you might have food or something. It's been a long hike. Why didn't you come closer and ask?" Sarah's voice trembled. "Why sneak around our tents like that?" He shrugged, a weak gesture that didn't convince me. "I'm not great with people. I didn't want to startle you. I was just curious. You're a long way from anywhere." Liam frowned. "We're not looking for trouble. But wandering near our camp at night? That's dangerous. For you and for us." The man nodded, eyes darting to the darkness beyond. "I know. Look, I'm sorry. I've been hiking these hills for years. Sometimes I camp too, but I keep to myself. I saw your fire and I thought maybe you had extra food, or a lighter. Mine ran out an hour ago." There was a hesitation in his voice, a cautious honesty that made me doubt he was dangerous, but the way he'd circled us, watching, clearly spooked us all. I stepped forward slowly, trying to decide whether to believe him. "Why didn't you tell us where you were going? Or at least make yourself known before prowling around our tents?" He looked down at his feet. "I don't like asking for help. Usually, I keep to the hills alone. But tonight, I lost my way. Didn't have signal on my phone. I thought I'd try to catch up to some people, see if I could get some help." Sarah spoke softly. "We could have helped you if you just said so." He looked up, eyes glistening with a mixture of relief and shame. "I know. I messed up. I'm sorry." There was a long pause as we all processed the situation. The fear that had gripped us only moments before was shifting, easing into cautious sympathy. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that this man's presence here, in such a remote place and at such a late hour, had changed something fundamental about our night. Tom finally lowered the flashlight but kept his gaze fixed on the man. "You need to stay here by the fire for a bit. We have some food and water. After that, you can head back the way you came." The man nodded gratefully and stepped fully into the firelight. The shadows no longer felt as threatening now that we knew he was human, vulnerable. But the tension lingered, a reminder that the wild isn't just dangerous because of the elements or animals, it's because of people too, and sometimes, you don't know what they're capable of until they're right there, circling your camp. We offered him some food and water, and as he sat quietly beside the fire, the night seemed to grow still again. I stared into the flames, thinking how close we'd come to something far worse than a restless wilderness, the fear of the unknown, of someone watching, waiting, just beyond the reach of the light. It wasn't the kind of fear you could outrun or ignore. It was the kind that burrows deep, a shadow that lingers long after the footsteps have stopped. But for now, at least, there was no one circling the tents. Only the crackling fire and the steady breathing of 4 friends and one reluctant stranger sharing the same fragile night. Story 5: Deadly Sudden Blackout and Collective Denial. The lights went out just before noon, without warning and without explanation. I remember the exact moment I realized this was no ordinary blackout. I looked down the street, expecting to see others pulling out phones, glancing anxiously, maybe even heading for the nearest metro entrance or a store with backup generators. But instead, everyone was walking as if nothing had happened. The vendors on the corner kept selling pastries from their stalls. The old man reading the newspaper at the bench just a few steps away didn't even flinch. I caught a woman's eye as she strolled by, and she smiled at me warm, like a neighbor greeting another on a normal autumn day, and said, "Beautiful weather we're having, isn't it?" I blinked, trying to find my footing. "The power's out," I said, voice barely above a whisper. She frowned slightly, as if I'd misunderstood her. "What do you mean?" "The electricity's fine. I was just on the phone with my son in the Marseilles arrondissement. No problems at all." I shook my head, heart thudding. "No, there's definitely a blackout. The lights just went out everywhere. Have you noticed? No phones, no trams running, no screens, nothing." Her smile became tight, the warmth draining. "You're mistaken. The city's fine. Maybe you're feeling unwell? You should sit down." I hesitated, suddenly feeling the weight of eyes on me, curious, concerned, but distinctly not alarmed. The realization dawned slowly, like a cold drip in my spine. No one else believed the blackout had happened. To them, the power grid was humming along as usual. Every store clerk, passerby, and commuter insisted the world hadn't shifted at all. The sense of isolation was immediate and profound. I reached for my phone again, but the screen remained stubbornly dark. I tried to call someone, anyone, but the cellular network was dead. No bars, no signal, as if the blackout had swallowed every bit of connectivity. I looked up at the sky, the autumn sun hidden behind a thin veil of clouds, but no comforting glow of street lamps or neon signs pierced the gray. I decided to leave the cafe, stepping out onto the street with a cautious urgency. The boulevard was eerily quiet, save for the soft crunch of leaves underfoot. Shops with shuttered windows stood like tombstones, their usual displays dark and lifeless. But as I passed by, shopkeepers looked up and nodded politely, their conversation continuing as if I'd just interrupted something mundane. I approached a newsstand, one of the few places that usually bristled with activity. The vendor looked up from his cigarette and smiled. Bonjour. How can I help you today? He asked, his voice warm but with a faint edge of impatience. Is the blackout affecting the whole city? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He shook his head. What blackout? Everything's working perfectly. I've been listening to the radio all morning. They said there was a small outage in the northern suburbs, nothing here. I frowned. No radio stations are broadcasting. I've been trying to reach someone. Nothing's responding. He shrugged, clearly unconvinced. Maybe your radio is broken. Mine's fine. He pointed at a small transistor radio beside him, the screen glowing faintly. The static hissed quietly. I stepped back, heart pounding. Have you noticed the traffic lights? They're all dead. I gestured toward the intersection a block away, where the usual red and green signals were dark. He laughed lightly. That's just the city's new regulations to reduce electricity consumption. They've been testing it for weeks. You must have missed the announcement. I shook my head, overwhelmed. Every attempt to explain the blackout, to find someone who acknowledged it, was met with denial or polite dismissal. It was as if the entire city, this vibrant, sprawling metropolis of Marseille, operated on a collective agreement to erase the blackout from memory. By mid-afternoon, my confusion had slid into something colder, fear-edged with frustration. I wandered the streets, trying every avenue, the police station, the train station, the municipal offices. Each time, I encountered the same story. No blackout, no disruption, just the normal humdrum of daily life. I even tried entering a hospital, hoping for some explanation, but the receptionist furrowed her brow and said the hospital had never lost power today, and if I was feeling unwell, perhaps I should see a doctor. The sense of unreality was suffocating. I started to doubt myself. Was I imagining this? Had I slipped somehow into a waking dream? But the darkness around me, the dead screens, the silent trams, the powerless street lamps told a different story. That evening, as dusk fell and the streets grew colder and less forgiving, I found a small hotel willing to give me a room. The receptionist was pleasant enough but insisted everything was normal, the city perfectly functional. The television in my room was dead, the windows showed no flicker of streetlights. I sat on the bed, the silence pressing in from all sides. I tried to call my parents back home in Chicago, hoping for some tether to sanity. The line went dead every time. I sent texts, emails, social media messages, all unanswered. It was as if I'd been erased from the shared reality of the world. Sleep was elusive. I lay awake, listening to the dark outside my window, the occasional distant shout or car horn breaking the silence. I wondered if I'd be seen as insane if I told someone what I was experiencing. The city, my city, had agreed to pretend the blackout never happened, and I was the only one left to remember. The next morning, I resolved to find answers, not from the city, but from myself. If no one would acknowledge the blackout, maybe I could find proof, some trace that the reality I lived in was true. But as I dressed and prepared to face the streets again, the weight of isolation pressed down harder than ever. I wasn't just alone. I was invisible. Her smile faltered for a flicker of a second, then she shook her head, resolute. I swallowed hard because I wanted to believe her. I wanted to chalk it up to some kind of mistake, maybe an isolated glitch in my phone's reception or a hallucination brought on by stress. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. My phone was dead, completely unresponsive since the blackout. The tram I'd seen stalled a few minutes ago hadn't moved an inch. The traffic lights at the intersection were dark, and every business storefront I passed had their interior lights off. Not a single screen lit up, not one sign blinking. Still, I forced a tight smile. Maybe you're right. Maybe I'm just imagining things. I looked down the street, searching for any sign of normalcy, something to cling to. But all I saw were blank screens, dormant neon signs, and people going about their days as if nothing had changed. I tried to talk to more people. The older man on the bench, the couple walking their dog, the woman sitting by the corner market who usually greeted me with a cheerful nod. Every single one insisted the power had never gone out. "Everything's perfectly fine," they said. "You should see a doctor if you're feeling unwell." When I mentioned the blacked out traffic lights, they either shrugged or shook their heads incredulously. "Those lights have been on all day," one said. "You must have missed them." By mid-afternoon, I was pacing in front of the local post office, trying to make sense of it all. The line of people waiting inside was moving at a normal, steady pace. The clerks behind the counter were chatting and stamping letters as if nothing was amiss. I walked inside and asked the woman at the counter, "Did the power go out today? Because outside it's all dark." She looked at me, her eyes narrowing slightly. "The lights have been on all day. You're probably confused or playing a joke." There was a tightness to her voice now, like I was an unwelcome disruption. "Don't waste your time." That was the first time I noticed people starting to avoid me, or worse, stare with suspicion. A man near the door muttered something under his breath and shifted away. A mother pulled her child closer, whispering urgently. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. I wasn't just being ignored, I was being singled out. I left the post office and wandered aimlessly through the streets. The building's dark windows seemed to mock me. No glow from within, no flicker of electricity, nothing. The cafes had candles on their tables, but the patrons around me were eating and drinking as if the place was bathed in the usual fluorescent light. No one lit those candles, they stayed unlit. Yet no one seemed to notice. I found myself standing in front of the tram station again. The tram was still there, motionless. I asked the driver if the power had been out, and he looked at me with genuine confusion. "Power out?" "No, we've been running all day." "You must be mistaken." I looked at his uniform, his badge, the blank tram screen behind him. It was all dead to the world, but to him, everything was fine. I started recording videos on my phone, desperate to document the blackout. But the screen refused to turn on. The camera app wouldn't open. I tried calling friends, sending messages, but my phone was completely dead. Even with full battery earlier, it wouldn't respond. It was like the blackout had eaten my device too. By evening, I was exhausted and terrified. I went back to my apartment building, a modest block near the old port. The stairwell was dark, lit only by the fading light from the street. I tried the elevator, no response. I had to walk up 4 flights of stairs, my heart pounding with each step. When I got to my door, I found a folded note slipped under it. I unfolded it carefully. It said, "Please stop causing trouble. Everything is fine. We don't want problems." No signature. No indication of who left it. I sank onto the floor, the note clutched in my shaking hands. The message was clear. I was not just isolated, I was being warned. As if the city itself were telling me to stop looking, stop questioning, stop disrupting the illusion. I considered calling the police, but what would I say? The power's out, but no one else knows it. I couldn't risk sounding unhinged. Besides, I had no proof. Just my own experience and the dead silence of my phone. Later, I tried to talk to my neighbor, an elderly woman named Madame Lefebvre. She was usually warm and kind, but when I told her about the blackout, her face hardened. "You must be tired, dear." "I'm sorry, but I don't have time for nonsense today." She closed her door firmly in my face. It wasn't just denial anymore. It was active rejection. I was becoming an alien in a place I called home for years. I spent the night sitting by my window, watching the city. The streets were alive with people moving about, illuminated only by moonlight and the dim glow of smartphones. The only screens that worked were the ones in the hands of those who refused to acknowledge the blackout. But when I looked closer, most phones were dark too, or so it seemed. I felt a growing fear that maybe I was losing my mind. But then I noticed something else. The clock on the City Hall tower had stopped at exactly 11:57 a.m., the time the blackout began. Everyone else's watches were moving, their digital clocks were running. But the city clock, that massive face I always glanced at to check the time, was frozen. The contradiction gnawed at me. How could everyone's reality be so completely different? I realized then that this was not just a blackout of power, it was a blackout of consensus. The city had erased the event from their collective memory, as if it had never happened. And I was the only one left who saw the darkened streets, the dead lights, the stillness where there should have been movement. But why? What were they hiding? Or was I the problem they wanted to hide from? I felt utterly alone. As I sat there, staring into the darkness outside, I heard a faint knock at my door. I froze. The silence outside was heavy, oppressive. The knock came again, soft, deliberate. I didn't answer. The knock stopped. Minutes passed. Then, almost imperceptibly, a voice from outside murmured through the doorframe, "Please. Just stop." I left the cafe where I tried to explain the blackout, but the woman's dismissive smile and the polite nods of the others still echoed in my head. I stepped onto Rue Saint-Ferréol and looked around. The street lamps were off, their glass globes reflecting the gray sky above like empty eyes. Shops stood open, their interiors bright with fluorescent light, the neon signs gleaming in defiance of the darkness I was drowning in. Inside, shopkeepers wore expressions of business as usual. I hesitated outside one, then pushed open the door. The air inside the bakery smelled of fresh croissants and coffee, warm and comforting. Behind the counter, a middle-aged man kneaded dough with practiced ease. When I asked about the blackout, he blinked, confused. "Blackout?" he echoed. "What blackout?" "The power's been on all day." His French was thick but clear. "This morning, I opened at 7. Lights all working perfectly. You want a pain o' chocolate?" I shook my head, feeling my pulse quicken. "No, I'm sorry. I just saw the whole street go dark." He chuckled, a dry, light sound. "You must have been somewhere else. Here, everything's normal." His eyes didn't waver, didn't flicker with doubt or concern. I left the bakery, trying to steady myself. The cold October air bit at my cheeks, and I wrapped my scarf tighter around my neck. I pulled out my phone, a useless, dead brick. No signal, no light. The screen remained stubbornly black. I started walking toward the viewport. The streets remained suspiciously empty for a Thursday afternoon, but those I did see passed by with calm, occasionally glancing at their phones or chatting quietly. Their phones were lit, their screens alive with messages and calls. One man stopped at a newsstand, thumb scrolling through headlines on his illuminated screen. I caught a glimpse, Marseille's energy grid stable and fully operational. That shattered something inside me. The city's own news was denying what I saw with my own eyes. I sat on a bench, trying to make sense of it all. The cold seeped through my jacket, but I barely noticed. My mind spun in circles. Was I losing it? Was this some elaborate joke? Some social experiment? I looked up at the sky. The clouds were thick, gray, but natural. Nothing supernatural, nothing out of the ordinary. I took deep breaths, trying to ground myself. Then I noticed a man sitting 2 benches away, staring at me. He was middle-aged, a jacket over his shirt, and his eyes were sharp, calculating. He didn't look away when I caught his gaze. I turned to face him. "Did you notice the blackout?" I asked cautiously. The whole city went dark. He smiled, but it was a tight, unnatural smile. "No blackout. The power's been on all day. You look tired. Maybe you need some rest." His voice was calm but held an edge, like he was testing me. "I'm fine," I said, standing. "Can you tell me if you saw the lights flicker just now? On Rue Saint Feriol?" He shook his head. "No flickers. No problems. Maybe you saw a transformer blow. Happens sometimes, but it's fixed quickly. You should really stop worrying about it." The insistence in his tone unsettled me. I nodded slowly and walked away, but his eyes followed me. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur. I tried every cafe, every shop, every person I could find, but the story was the same: no blackout, no power outage, no interruption to their day. People seemed friendly but guarded, as if any mention of the blackout was an unwelcome disruption to their reality. Desperate, I went to the tourism office near the old port. The building's big glass doors were open, and inside, the receptionist worked at a brightly lit desk. I approached, explained the situation, careful to keep my voice steady. She smiled politely, touched her earbud, and said, "Sir, there hasn't been any power outage in Marseille today. The grid is working perfectly. If you're having trouble with your phone, maybe you need to visit your provider." I showed her my dead phone, the blank screen, no signal. She nodded sympathetically. Technology can be funny sometimes. But the city's power has been stable. As I left, a man outside lit a cigarette, glancing at me. "You should stop talking about that. It makes people uncomfortable." Uncomfortable? I was the one who felt like an intruder in a world that refused to acknowledge the blackout. By evening, the streets had grown darker, not from the absence of power, but from the setting sun. I passed a group of teenagers laughing, their phones glowing in their hands. One of them looked up, saw me staring, and said, "Hey, you okay? You look lost." I didn't answer. I felt a sinking emptiness gnawing at me. The city was alive, but I was alone, trapped in a version of reality no one else saw. I tried calling a friend, but the number wouldn't connect. I sent messages, but no replies came. It was like I'd fallen through a crack in the world. Back at my flat, I flicked on every light switch. Nothing. I checked the fuse box, it was intact. The outlets had no power. Outside, the city glowed brightly, windows lit up like beacons, the hum of Marseille's nightlife filling the air. I sat by my window, watching the city pulse with energy I couldn't share. Was I going mad? Or was this some kind of mass psychological phenomenon? Was I the only one trapped in a blackout no one else acknowledged? Sleep evaded me. The silence inside my apartment was oppressive, a cold void contrasting with the vibrant life just beyond the glass. I could hear voices from the street, music, laughter, life continuing as if nothing had happened. And yet, I knew the truth. The blackout was real. I had lived it. But the city denied it with every fiber of its being. In the dark, I felt the first creeping tendrils of fear, not for my safety, but for my sanity. Because if the world insisted my reality was false, then what was left for me to trust? I wasn't sure I had the answer. But I knew one thing. This was only the beginning. Morning spilled over Marseille like it always did, pale and hesitant through fogged windows. I stepped into the narrow street, clutching the small paper bag with the croissants I'd grabbed from the boulangerie. The bell above the shop door jingled normally as I left, but inside, the owner had given me a strange look. "Ah, the power's been on all morning, hasn't it?" she said brightly, as though responding to an unspoken question. "Probably a local glitch you experienced." I forced a smile and nodded, swallowing the urge to press her. It was the same everywhere. People insisted the electricity had never faltered. Trams had run on schedule, their LED displays flickering perfectly, phones were charged and calls uninterrupted, cafes hummed with the usual morning rush, their machines steaming and buzzing. Yet, I remembered the darkness, the silence, the dead screens. The emptiness of the streets when the city didn't move. I wandered toward the Place Castellane, hoping to find someone who might admit the blackout, a journalist, maybe, or a shopkeeper with a hint of confusion behind their eyes. But all I found was unanimous denial. A man sipping his espresso glanced up and said, "Are you feeling all right?" "The power's been steady all day." A group of teenagers laughed when I asked if they remembered the sudden silence hours earlier. I felt increasingly like a ghost, a remnant of an event erased by collective will. By midday, my phone buzzed for the first time in what felt like forever. I grabbed it eagerly, but the screen was flooded with notifications speaking of a perfectly normal day in Marseille. News outlets posted articles about the crisp October weather, a minor traffic accident, a local soccer match, no mention of any blackout. I tried calling my sister, Camille, who lived in the 6th arrondissement. The line rang normally and then clicked into voicemail as always. I left a message, careful to sound calm despite the knot tightening in my chest. "Hey, Camille. It's me. I just wanted to check if you noticed any power outage today. I thought the power went out around noon, but everyone says nothing happened. Call me back when you can." Minutes stretched. No call. I walked along Rue Paradis, everything bathed in the soft autumn light, the city alive but somehow wrong. At the station, electronic boards displayed arrivals and departures flawlessly. The trams glided in and out, passengers chatting and scrolling on their phones. No one seemed to perceive the fracture in reality I was grappling with. A sinking realization crept over me. No one else remembered the blackout, because it never happened, at least, not in their shared experience. My reality alone, fractured and isolated. I found a bench near the fountain and sat, pulling out the crumpled crepe wrapper from my pocket. I tried to steady my breathing, to think through the possibilities. Was I losing my grip on reality? Could I have dreamed the outage? Yet, the darkness had been so vivid, so complete. And the silence, it was deafening. My mind replayed every conversation, every glance that had felt off. The old man on the bench had told me the power had never been out. The woman who smiled and commented on the weather had insisted the grid was flawless. Even the policeman on patrol laughed when I asked about the blackout, saying, "You need more sleep, monsieur." I caught my reflection in a shop window, a pale man with tired eyes, clutching an invisible thread that connected him to a world no one else saw. As afternoon faded into early evening, I decided to visit the municipal offices. If anyone would acknowledge an official blackout, it would be there. The building loomed with its grand stone facade, flags fluttering in the breeze. Inside, I approached the clerk, an older woman with wireframe glasses, who typed steadily at her computer. I hesitated, then asked, "Excuse me, do you have any record of a power outage today?" She looked up and smiled gently. "No, monsieur. Everything's been smooth as always. We monitor it closely. No interruptions. Even around noon?" I pressed. She nodded. "No problems reported. Is everything all right with your electricity?" I nodded, swallowing down the lump in my throat. "Yes. Thank you." Outside, the sky was bruising with the onset of dusk. The streets were bathed in golden light, the city's hum growing louder. I pulled my jacket tighter, feeling the weight of invisible walls closing in. In the metro station, I tried again. The automated announcements were clear and precise. Screens showed advertisements and news flashes. I asked a station attendant if any blackout had disrupted service. He laughed, shaking his head. "Non, monsieur. The trains have been running all day. You must be mistaken." I didn't argue. On the tram ride home, I sat by the window, watching Marseille slide past in its familiar rhythms. I imagined the blackout fading like a bad dream in the minds of others, while it burned in mine with stubborn clarity. Back in my apartment, the power hummed steadily. The television's glow filled the room. I flicked through channels, each one glossy and uninterrupted. It was impossible to prove anything. Impossible to share an experience that everyone else denied. I tried calling Camille again, but the line was busy. I left another message, my voice quieter this time. Later, I scrolled through social media, searching for clues, comments, anyone else who might have noticed anything. But the feeds were filled with pictures of the city bathed in sunlight, smiling faces at cafes, and ordinary life. No mention of a blackout. No sign that anyone else had seen the abyss I'd witnessed. A creeping suspicion took hold. Was this all some kind of psychological experiment? A mass hallucination induced by unknown means? Or something more sinister, a coordinated erasure of a moment that could not be allowed to exist? I couldn't know. I had no allies. No proof. And yet the memory was real. The silence was real. The darkness had been real. I went to the window and looked down the street. Lights glowed warmly from apartments. People passed by, chatting and laughing, their faces illuminated by street lamps and phone screens. They saw nothing amiss. They believed in the uninterrupted power grid. And I was left alone with the truth that isolated me, the unspoken event that didn't exist for anyone but me. The night crept in, swallowing the city's colors. Marseille's heartbeat continued undisturbed, unaware or unwilling to acknowledge the blackout in my world. I sat back, the weight of solitude anchoring me to the silence no one else heard. I kept my voice low as I stepped into the cafe on Rue Saint-Ferréol, the one with the faded red awning and the chipped tile floor. I took a seat near the window and ordered an espresso, despite my growing unease. The barista, a young man with a tight smile, slid the cup across the counter without a second glance. He was talking on his phone a moment later, his voice casual, laughing about a football match like nothing was wrong. I tried again, this time asking the woman sitting next to me if she had noticed any outage earlier that day. She glanced up from her book, brow furrowing slightly. "Outage? No, I arrived just an hour ago. The lights have been on all day." Her tone was polite but firm, as though I'd just suggested something absurd. "How can you be so sure?" I pressed, lowering my voice. The entire city, there was no power for hours. The trams stopped. Shops were closed. I even saw people carrying candles on the street. She blinked, set her book down, and shook her head. "I don't know where you've been, but nothing like that happened here today. Life went on as normal." I swallowed hard, trying to suppress the panic building in my chest. Was I losing my mind? Was I the only person experiencing this? When I left the cafe, the autumn air felt colder somehow, sharper. The skies were a dull gray, and a thick fog was rolling in from the harbor. I walked toward the old port, hoping the water might offer some clarity, some grounding in reality. But nothing was as I remembered. In past days, the port was alive with fishermen unloading crates, tourists snapping photos, children chasing pigeons. Today, It was strangely animated but normal, boats bobbing in the water, vendors selling fresh fish under fluorescent lamps, couples strolling hand in hand beneath the glowing streetlights. Not a single person seemed to acknowledge that anything was amiss. I approached an elderly man sitting on a bench, feeding crumbs to a flock of pigeons. His face was lined and weathered, his hands trembling slightly in the cold. "Excuse me, sir," I said cautiously, "did you notice if the power went out earlier today?" He looked up, eyes clear but distant. "What nonsense are you talking about? The power's been steady since morning. If anything, it's been too bright today." He chuckled softly, shaking his head. "You're worrying over nothing, mon ami." The words hit me like a blow. Everyone was telling me the same thing, denying the blackout, insisting the power had never faltered. Was this some kind of collective delusion? Had I walked into a trap of my own mind? I started to pace along the quay, scanning faces, searching for any sign of confusion or acknowledgement. Nothing. People smiled, talked, gestured, lived their lives as if nothing unusual had happened. Then I noticed him, a man standing just a few steps away, watching me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. He was tall, dressed in a dark coat despite the mild weather, and his eyes were fixed on me like a hawk tracking prey. I froze, suddenly aware of how exposed I felt. I tried to ignore him, turned and quickened my pace, but I could feel his gaze following every step. When I glanced back, he was gone. That moment shattered something inside me. I was no longer just isolated by the strange denial of the blackout. I was being watched. Maybe by more than one person. I ducked into a narrow alleyway, heart pounding. The fog thickened, muffling the sounds of the city. For a moment, I thought I heard footsteps behind me, quick, deliberate, but when I stopped and turned, no one was there. The streets were no longer just indifferent, they felt hostile. The people around me weren't just ignoring reality, they were protecting a truth I wasn't meant to see. But why? What had happened to the city while I was shut off from the world? I checked my phone again. No signal. The screen brightened, but the battery drained faster than usual. Messages wouldn't send, calls failed. It was the same as during the blackout, but everyone else insisted they had been connected all day. I found a small newsstand and grabbed the latest newspaper. The headline screamed about the success of a new city infrastructure project. No mention of any power outage, no disruption, nothing unusual. Photographs showed smiling officials inaugurating a new electric substation, framed by glowing streetlights. I asked the vendor, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes, "Did you see the blackout? The power failure?" She gave me a tight smile. "No blackout. The city is stronger than ever." Her voice was calm but carried an unspoken warning. I let the newspaper fall back into her hands and moved on. I walked back toward my apartment, the fog swirling thick as I crossed Place Castellane. The normal chatter of the city seemed muted, as if the fog swallowed sound along with light. I was exhausted, hungry, and more alone than I'd ever felt. At my door, I paused and looked back at the street. A figure stood across the road, a woman this time, watching me. She vanished when I blinked. Inside, I locked every door and window, drew the curtains tight, and sat in the dark. My mind raced with questions, each more terrifying than the last. Was the blackout real or a hallucination? Had the city agreed to erase the memory of the outage? And who were those watching me? Friends? Enemies? Or something worse? Sleep was impossible, my nerves stretched thin. Every creak of the building, every distant horn made me flinch. I felt like I was trapped between two worlds, one where the lights went out, and one where they never did. And no one, not a single soul, would help me find my way back. I reached for my journal, the only thing that felt real and mine. I wrote down everything, every detail, every conversation, every moment of denial I had witnessed. If the truth was slipping away, I wanted to hold on to it, to prove to myself that I hadn't lost my mind completely. Tomorrow, I decided, I would try again. I had to know why the blackout was a secret no one would admit. Who was behind the silence? And most of all, how I could survive in a city that refused to recognize its own darkness. Story 6, Lost Guest spots blinking light inside smoke detector and investigates. I arrived in Bangalore on a humid August afternoon, the kind of heavy heat that clings to your skin and makes the air feel thick, almost viscous. After check-in, I was given the key card and directed to room 712 on the 7th floor. The hallway was quiet, unusually so for a weekday evening in a city this bustling. The air conditioning hummed faintly, and the lights overhead flickered just once before stabilizing. I stepped inside my room, which was predictably nondescript: 2 twin beds pushed together, a small desk, a TV mounted on the wall, a wardrobe, and the inevitable mini-fridge. The window looked out over a jumble of rooftops and the distant spires of the city's skyline. I set my bags down, peeled off my damp shirt, and sank heavily onto the bed. Jet lag was gnawing at the edges of my mind, but I needed to get ready for the welcome dinner in a couple of hours. As I pulled my phone from my pocket to check the time, I noticed a faint blinking light in the corner of the ceiling opposite the window. At first, I dismissed it as a stray reflection or perhaps a malfunctioning indicator on a device I hadn't noticed before. The light came from the smoke detector mounted in the center of the ceiling. A slow, rhythmic blinking red, almost imperceptible unless you were staring directly at it. I knew smoke detectors typically had a tiny LED to show they were powered and functioning, but this blinking seemed off. Too deliberate. Too steady. Curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed a chair from the desk, placed it beneath the detector, and climbed up. The device was a white plastic dome, about 6 inches in diameter, blending seamlessly with the ceiling. I circled the edge of it with my fingertips, feeling for seams or anything unusual. That's when I spotted it, a tiny pinhole near the center, just beneath the plastic cover. The blinking light was shining through it. My pulse quickened. A camera, I thought. No smoke detector had a blinking camera inside it. I pulled my phone out and zoomed in on the hole. Sure enough, behind the plastic cover was a small lens, shining faintly red and catching the light from my phone's screen. My hands trembled slightly as I climbed down, heart pounding. I wanted to tell myself I was imagining things, that maybe the hotel just had a strange, new kind of smoke detector with some sort of built-in sensor. But the blinking light, the pinhole lens, there was no other explanation. Someone had installed a hidden camera in my room. My room. I sat on the bed, trying to steady my breathing. How long had it been there? Since I arrived? Or before? Had anyone else used this room? Was the camera connected to a live feed, or was it recording for later? My mind raced with scenarios, none of them comforting. I pulled up the room phone and dialed the front desk. The line rang twice before a woman's voice answered. I kept my voice steady, careful not to sound panicked. Hi. I just checked into room 712, and I noticed something strange with the smoke detector. It seems to have a blinking light and maybe a camera lens inside it. Could you send someone to check, please? There was a pause on the other end. I'm sorry, sir, but all our smoke detectors are standard models. Could you describe the blinking light? I hesitated. It's a slow red blink near the center, and I think I saw a tiny lens inside the cover. Another pause, longer this time. Sir, we take guest privacy very seriously. I'll send maintenance up to inspect it immediately. I hung up, but anxiety gnawed at me. I didn't want to wait. I needed to be sure. I looked around the room for anything else unusual. The wardrobe doors closed firmly, no gaps behind the mirror, the air conditioning unit was standard, and the TV remote had no unexpected modifications. But the smoke detector, there was no doubt. 10 minutes later, a man in a maintenance uniform knocked and entered, carrying a toolkit. He was middle-aged, with a friendly but tired face. I explained what I'd found. He glanced up at the ceiling and pressed a button on a small device he pulled from his pocket. The blinking light stopped, and he unscrewed the detector, taking it down carefully. Inside, he examined the unit with a flashlight. "This is the normal model we use," he said after a moment. "Nothing unusual here." He held up the detector for me to see. No lens, no blinking light. I frowned, but I saw the blinking light. And a tiny lens, like a camera. He shook his head. "Maybe a reflection, sir. Sometimes the LED flashes, but not like a camera. I'll replace it with a new detector, just in case." He installed the new detector, which remained steady and silent once powered. Still, the doubt lingered. I thanked him, but after he left, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. That night, I slept with the lights on, avoiding the ceiling as much as possible. I kept my phone close, scanning the room periodically. The thought that someone might be watching my every move through that hidden lens made my skin crawl. The next morning, I checked the room again. The new detector was solid white, no blinking. But the seed of paranoia had been planted. How many other rooms had that camera? How long had it been watching? I resolved to contact the hotel management in the morning, maybe even the police if I found more evidence. But for now, I was trapped in the room, under a ceiling that had once harbored a quiet, unblinking eye. The city outside went about its business, indifferent and relentless. But inside room 712, a silent terror had taken root, and I wasn't sure how to escape it. I sat up straighter in bed, eyes fixed on the smoke detector. Curiosity overrode my tiredness. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight function, and stood on the bed to get a closer look. The smoke detector was about 8 feet above me, centered on the ceiling near the entrance door. Its surface was smooth and glossy, with the usual vents and a small test button. But then I noticed something else, a tiny, almost imperceptible lens embedded amidst the vents, glinting faintly in the beam of my phone's light. A camera. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Until then, I hadn't even thought about being watched, but now the pieces fell into place. The blinking light was probably an indicator on a hidden recording device. Someone had installed a camera disguised as a smoke detector to spy on me or anyone staying in that room. I stepped back and let out a slow breath, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't want to believe it, maybe I was overreacting, but the evidence was clear. This was no accident, no hotel oversight. Someone had deliberately set up a surveillance device, and I was the unwitting subject. I pulled the bedside lamp closer, switching it on to flood the room with light. Shadows hid no secrets now. I scanned every corner, every electronic device. Nothing else seemed out of place, but I knew better than to trust my eyes after that. My mind raced. Who could have done this? Was it the hotel staff? Some other guest? I remembered double-checking the room before settling in, but I hadn't thought to look at the smoke detector. I'd noticed the blinking light only after unpacking and was already tired. The implications were worse than I'd imagined. If someone had been recording me, they would have had access to everything, my conversations, my phone calls, every private moment. The sense of violation was suffocating. I felt exposed, vulnerable in a way I never had before. I pulled out my phone and searched for apps that could detect hidden cameras, but most required specialized hardware or permissions I didn't have. Still, A couple of apps claimed to find nearby devices by scanning for unusual Wi-Fi signals or Bluetooth connections. I ran a quick scan. Nothing came up. I cursed under my breath. Whoever had set this up had done their homework. The camera must have been transmitting over a secure network or storing locally to be retrieved later. I felt more helpless than I wanted to admit. After a moment, I decided to document the evidence. I took close-up photos of the smoke detector, the tiny lens, and the blinking light. If I needed to report this later, I wanted proof. Then I sat back on the bed, hands trembling slightly. I debated what to do next. Calling the front desk felt risky. What if they were involved? Walking out now and demanding another room might alert whoever was watching that I discovered the camera. I thought about calling the police, but would they believe me? In a foreign country, dealing with unfamiliar authorities, I wasn't sure how seriously they'd take a hidden camera complaint. Besides, it was late, and I was already exhausted. Outside the window, the city lights flickered against the humid night sky, indifferent to my predicament. I felt isolated, cut off from help. I glanced again at the smoke detector, wishing I could rip it down and smash it to pieces. Instead, I sat quietly, spinning scenarios in my head. Was this a targeted intrusion, or had the previous guests left the camera? Was there a pattern of these devices being installed in this hotel? How long had it been here? The thought of every moment since I checked and being recorded made my skin crawl. I realized I hadn't taken off my shirt since arriving, not because I was modest, but because I was suddenly self-conscious about everything. I stared at the camera lens, imagining the person on the other end watching me, invisible and unknown. Minutes passed with the silence growing heavy. I forced myself to move, to do something. I searched the room for anything to cover the camera, a piece of paper, tape, anything opaque. The desk drawer had a notepad. I tore a sheet and affixed it over the smoke detector with a bit of tape from the minibar's tiny welcome pack. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it would block the lens for now. At least I could rest without feeling watched. I sat back and tried to calm my racing thoughts. The paranoia was overwhelming, but I needed to stay logical. I pulled up the hotel directory from the desk and found the manager's contact. I hesitated, fingers hovering over the phone screen. Should I call now, or wait until morning? What if I was making a mistake? I decided to text the manager instead, something low-key, not accusatory, just a request for a room change due to maintenance issues. I didn't want to reveal what I'd found just yet. After sending the message, I packed a small bag with essentials, ready to move if needed. But deep down, I knew I wouldn't sleep here, not while that camera was somewhere nearby. As I lay back on the bed, I stared at the covered smoke detector, my mind replaying every moment I'd spent in the room so far. I thought about the times I'd changed clothes, spoken on the phone, or just relaxed with no awareness of being watched. The vulnerability gnawed at me relentlessly. In a city as vast as Bangalore, how many others have fallen victim to this? And if someone had done this to me, what was their end game? I closed my eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. The blinking light, though hidden now, burned brightly in my mind. Hours later, long after the city's noise had quieted, a soft vibration on my phone woke me. A reply from the manager. We apologize for any inconvenience caused. Your request has been noted. We will arrange for a new room first thing in the morning. Relief mixed with unease. At least I wasn't alone in this now, but questions remained. Who had planted that camera, and why? And more importantly, what else was hidden in the shadows of this hotel? I resolved to be vigilant. This was no longer just a hotel stay, it was a trap I'd narrowly escaped, and I wasn't about to let it happen again. Still, the unease lingered, a low, persistent hum beneath the surface of my thoughts. I wasn't just a guest here anymore. I was a target. I wasn't entirely sure when the suspicion took hold. Maybe it was the way the blinking light didn't match the usual steady glow I expected from a smoke detector, or how it pulsed in an odd, irregular rhythm. The room was dim, illuminated only by the soft yellow glow of the bedside lamp. I closed the curtains, feeling the weight of the city's distant rumble fade into near silence. My heart still thumped with unease from the dinner's chatter, but now there was a sharper focus, a creeping edge to my nerves. I looked up at the smoke detector mounted dead center on the ceiling near the entrance. There it was, an unmistakable red light blinking at uneven intervals. I fetched the chair from the desk and placed it beneath the detector. Climbing up with some effort, I reached out and circled my fingers around the device's plastic casing. It was lightweight, a bit bulkier than usual. I turned it gently, expecting to find a way to open it or at least remove it from the ceiling mount. It came loose with a little force, and I held the device in my palm. The front was typical white, circular, the kind of thing designed to blend into the ceiling. But when I turned it over, the back revealed something unusual. Behind a tiny, dark lens embedded discreetly near the edge, a faint red light pulsed steadily. It was unmistakably a camera. My stomach dropped. I sat back on the bed, the smoke detector camera in my hands, my mind racing. It captured everything, the entire room, every movement, every private moment. The fact that it was in the place I least expected, hidden in the very device that was supposed to protect me, twisted the room into something sinister. I pulled out my phone to take pictures, but my fingers trembled. After a few attempts, I managed to get a good shot of the lens and the blinking light. I texted the images to myself, then deleted them immediately, worried the phone might be compromised too. I stared at the ceiling for a long moment, trying to process what this meant. Who would do this? Why? The hotel was a reputable place, or at least it had been listed so online. I had no reason to suspect the staff, but this was too elaborate to be a coincidence. Someone was watching me, and maybe others like me. I remembered the man I'd seen earlier in the lobby, someone who had lingered in the hallway with a strange intensity, not quite staff, not quite guest. His eyes seemed to flicker toward my room number when I passed by. Suddenly, it all connected. The camera wasn't just a device, it was an invasion. I felt exposed, violated in a way I hadn't anticipated. The room, which had moments ago felt like a safe harbor after a long day of travel, now felt like a cage lined with invisible wires and prying eyes. I wanted to call the front desk. I considered demanding an explanation immediately. But as I paced the room, my thoughts scattered. What if the people behind this were still here? What if they were watching my every move right now, waiting to see how I'd react? I decided to document everything. I pulled out the little notebook I'd been keeping since the trip started and scribbled the date, time, and details of the discovery alongside a quick sketch of the smoke detector's shape and the camera lens. It felt like the only way to ground myself, to turn this surreal moment into something concrete. I also searched the device for any identifying marks or serial numbers. There was nothing obvious, just a model number that didn't correspond to typical fire safety equipment. I considered calling the local authorities, but the thought of explaining this in broken English to an unfamiliar police department in the middle of a foreign city was daunting. Instead, I resolved to gather more information. I needed to confirm whether this was an isolated device or part of a larger scheme. My first priority was to check the rest of the room, then the hotel itself. I spent the next hour inspecting every corner of the room. The lamps, the air conditioner, the smoke detector in the bathroom, the thermostat, all typical, but I checked for unusual blinking lights or suspicious lenses. Nothing else stood out. I then turned my attention to the door lock. It was an electronic keycard system, standard enough, but I tested it meticulously. I found no signs of tampering. Whoever had installed the camera must have had access during housekeeping or maintenance. A knock at the door startled me. I froze. The late hour meant no visitors, and the hallway was dead quiet. Swallowing hard, I moved to the peephole and looked out. The hallway was empty. I opened the door a crack but saw nothing unusual. When I looked down, a small folded piece of paper had been slipped under the door. I picked it up, heart pounding, and unfolded it carefully. Written in neat handwriting was a single sentence: "We see everything. Keep quiet." No signature. I closed the door slowly, locked it, and backed away. The reality had settled like a stone in my gut. This was no random act, no coincidence. There was an intentional, calculated intrusion into my privacy. And now, a direct threat. I debated calling the front desk again, but the note had chilled me too much. If the hotel staff were involved, or worse, if there was a criminal operation embedded within the hotel's walls, I was in danger. I needed to think strategically. I locked the door, pulled the curtains tighter, and placed the smoke detector camera on the desk. My mind raced for solutions. I thought about leaving immediately, but my flight wasn't until tomorrow evening. If I left now, I'd have to lug my bags through the streets of Bangalore late at night, alone. I sat down and tried to calm my breathing. The room felt colder somehow, the shadows sharper. Every noise seemed amplified, the distant hum of the air conditioning, the faint creak of the building settling. I stared at the camera lens. It was like a black eye, willing me to submit. I considered smashing it, but then moved my hand away. Destroying it might provoke whoever was behind this. Instead, I wrapped the device in a towel and stuffed it into my suitcase, thinking I could hand it over to the police later. Sleep was impossible. I lay awake, listening for footsteps, dreading knocks, feeling like I was part of an invisible play I didn't understand. The hotel room, once just a temporary shelter, had become a trap. Every minute was a countdown, and I knew I had to find out who was watching and why before it was too late. The blinking light refused to leave my mind as I sat on the edge of the bed, my eyes fixed on the smoke detector in the ceiling corner. I tried to shake off the feeling and diverted my attention to exploring the room. Opening drawers, peering behind the curtains, checking the lampshade, anything to distract myself. But the blinking light kept drawing me back up to the ceiling. I could almost convince myself it was a harmless LED, part of some newfangled device the hotel had installed. Still, I couldn't ignore the sense of intrusion that crept in. Eventually, curiosity won out. I stood on tiptoe on the chair I dragged over and reached up, fingers trembling slightly as I touched the smoke detector's plastic casing. It was lighter than I thought, easy to twist. I gave it a slow, careful turn, half expecting to set off an alarm or at least hear a click. Instead, the device came off smoothly, revealing a small cavity behind it, dark, hollow, and suspiciously empty except for a tangle of wires. My heart started to pound as I noticed a tiny lens embedded somewhere in the plastic rim, camouflaged perfectly amidst what looked like ventilation holes. The blinking light was coming from a minute red LED beside the lens. It dawned on me then, this was no ordinary smoke detector. It was a hidden camera. I dropped the device onto the bed, the plastic making a dull thud against the sheets. I scanned the room, almost expecting to see a hidden observer lurking somewhere, but found nothing. The air suddenly felt thick, oppressive, heavy with the weight of violation. I was supposed to be safe here. This was a hotel room, a temporary refuge, a private space. And someone had been watching me. Panic bubbled under the surface, sharp and cold. I pictured the invisible eye trained on me, recording every movement, every gesture, every moment of vulnerability since I'd arrived. The moments I'd peeled off my shirt, the quiet sighs after a long day, the stuff I wouldn't want strangers to see. My skin prickled with dread. I pulled out my phone, hand shaking as I Googled hidden cameras in hotel rooms. The search results were unnervingly full of similar stories, guests finding cameras disguised as smoke detectors, alarm clocks, even power outlets. The technology was frighteningly small and clever, designed to invade privacy without detection. I wanted to call the front desk, the police, someone. But the thought of announcing this in a public space made me hesitate. What if the staff was complicit? What if the camera was placed by someone with access beyond the hotel employees? Bangalore was a sprawling city with countless secrets lurking in the shadows. I was a guest in this strange place, and suddenly I felt incredibly vulnerable. With trembling fingers, I took a few photos of the camera and the hole in the ceiling, hoping to capture clear evidence. Then I stuffed the smoke detector back into place, careful not to break it, trying to make it look untouched. I didn't want whoever had installed it to know I'd found it. Not yet. I sat down heavily on the bed, breathing shallow and fast. The blinking light was gone, but the feeling of being watched lingered, like a shadow cast over everything in the room. The night outside was dark and silent, but inside, my mind was racing. I thought about the people who might be behind this. Was it the hotel management? A rogue employee? A stranger with access to the building's maintenance? The questions twisted in my head, each possibility more unsettling than the last. Then I remembered the little card they'd slipped into my hand at check-in, the one with the hotel's policies and emergency contacts. I scanned it quickly, hesitating at the number for security. I couldn't just sit here and pretend this hadn't happened. I needed to report it, but how? My phone buzzed a message from my colleague back home, checking in, asking how the trip was going. I stared at the screen, the simple question feeling like a cruel joke. How could I explain any of this without sounding paranoid or insane? I typed back a vague reply, mentioning the usual exhaustion and heat, then set the phone down. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, even though the room was empty. The blinking light wasn't there anymore, but the knowledge that the camera had been recording was enough to make me shiver. Hours passed in a fog of restless thoughts. I tried to focus on work emails, but every glance toward the ceiling made my stomach churn. Sleep was impossible. When morning came, I decided I had to act. I took the smoke detector down again, this time carefully opening it with a small screwdriver I found in the drawer. Inside was a tiny circuit board, a micro SD card slot, and a battery pack. I removed the card, knowing it could hold hours, maybe days, of footage. I wrapped everything carefully in my shirt and headed to the front desk. My voice was steady, but inside I was shaking as I asked to speak with the manager. The man who arrived was polite, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. He listened as I explained, pulling out the smoke detector and the micro SD card. His expression tightened slightly. "We take privacy very seriously," he said, but there was an edge to his tone that didn't quite convince me. "We will investigate immediately." I pressed him on who else had access to the rooms, how long the device might have been there, but his answers were vague, rehearsed. I could tell he was trying to keep things from escalating. I wanted to believe him, but the knot of doubt in my gut only grew tighter. That night, I left the hotel and stayed with a friend nearby. I couldn't face the room, not yet. I felt exposed, raw, like the hidden camera had stripped away any sense of safety I'd had. In Bangalore's sprawling maze of streets and unseen corners, I realized how easily trust could be violated, and how the most mundane objects could conceal the darkest invasions of privacy. I didn't know who had placed that camera, or why. But I knew one thing for certain: I would never look at a smoke detector the same way again. The blinking light inside the smoke detector was impossible to ignore now. I paced the room quietly, trying to stave off the rising tide of panic that was curling in my chest. Every time I looked up, the faint red glow blinked back at me, accusing, invasive. I wanted to convince myself it was a defect or some harmless indicator. But the more I stared, the more I knew it couldn't be just that. The walls seemed to close in. The air conditioning, which had been a comfort against the Bangalore humidity, now hummed like a mechanical watcher. My phone buzzed on the desk, the screen lighting up with a message from a colleague about the welcome dinner. I didn't want to reply, didn't want to move. I felt trapped inside my own room, the only witness to whatever was embedded in that little device. I had to do something. I'd always been careful with privacy, never posted too much on social media, always aware of my surroundings. But this felt deeper, more intrusive. I grabbed the small desk chair and dragged it beneath the smoke detector. My hands trembled as I climbed up and reached for the device. At first touch, the detector was heavier than I expected, with a slight weight that wasn't typical. I twisted it gently, expecting it to pop off the mounting bracket easily, but it resisted. The device had a strange, cold solidity. My fingers found a small seam at the base, and with enough force, the front panel came loose, revealing a small circuit board inside. And there it was, a tiny camera lens, no bigger than a pinhole, staring out from the device's center. The blinking light was connected to it, a faint red diode on the printed circuit board. My heart hammered as I stared down the evidence of this violation. I stepped down from the chair, heart pounding, mind racing. Who had put this here? Why? How long had it been filming? Every private moment, every time I changed, every conversation, recorded without my knowledge. The thought made my skin crawl. I grabbed my phone and took several photos of the device, the wiring, the lens. I needed proof. Then I texted the front desk, "There's a suspicious device in my room." I found a hidden camera disguised as a smoke detector. "Please send security immediately." 10 minutes passed with agonizing slowness. I sat on the edge of the bed, eyes darting to the ceiling every few seconds. The blinking light was gone now, the device was off its mount and on the desk next to me, inert and exposed. I felt a strange mix of relief and vulnerability. I had uncovered it, but the damage was done. The doorbell rang sharply. I opened it to find 2 hotel staff members, a young man in security uniform and a woman from the front desk. They looked serious but guarded. I showed them the device and the photos. The security guard examined the camera closely, nodding as if confirming what I already knew. The woman from the front desk's expression hardened. "We are very sorry, sir," she said quietly. "We take your privacy very seriously. Please allow us to investigate." Her eyes flicked toward the hallway, as if she was already calculating the next steps. I asked, "How long has this been here? Who else had access to this room?" She hesitated, then replied, "We cannot say yet. We will review security footage and audit our staff. This is the first time something like this has been reported." I nodded, my mind spinning. The security guard carefully wrapped the device in a plastic bag, treating it like evidence. He promised to send it to an expert for analysis. After they left, I locked the door behind them and sat down heavily. I felt raw, exposed. The hotel room was no longer a safe haven but a trap I'd managed to escape. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from my manager, asking if I was okay. I typed a short reply, found a hidden camera in my room. "Don't want to talk now." The hours that followed were a blur of anxiety and unease. I kept checking the ceiling, the walls, the bathroom, anywhere another device might be lurking. Each shadow felt suspicious, every sound amplified. I couldn't sleep. When the hotel manager called later that evening, she sounded contrite but evasive. "We are taking this matter very seriously. We have started an internal investigation and are cooperating with local authorities. Your safety is our priority." I thanked her but felt no relief. The thought that someone, somewhere, had been watching me without my consent, without my knowledge, was unbearable. The city outside my window, once vibrant and alive, seemed suddenly sinister, complicit. I packed my bags early the next morning. I requested a different hotel, one with better reviews and no history of complaints. As I left, I looked back at the building, the same one where I'd felt so alone and vulnerable just hours before. The experience had shaken me to my core. Trust had been broken, and even though I was safe now, a part of me remained alert, watchful, haunted by the knowledge that in a world connected by technology, privacy could be stolen in the blink of an eye. I vowed to be more cautious, to guard my digital footprints fiercely. From now on, every password, every connection would be scrutinized, no room for complacency.